Chapter 1032. The tremors were so strong that all the cultivators on the Chelan cliff felt like they could not stand still. They felt like they were shaking along with time and space. For a time, all sorts of fear, horror, and shock appeared in the minds of these hundreds of thousands of cultivators, causing them to completely suppress all thoughts of resistance they had before. For a time, they had a deeper understanding of how terrifying Wu Daozi and Luo Fan were, and from then on, they didn't dare to compare themselves to the two of them. The scene after Luo Fan's talisman palm collided with the strange beast was that the void shattered and time became chaotic. With the point of impact as the center, the void within a radius of a few hundred miles turned into a strange scene. At first glance, everything seemed normal. However, if one looked closely, they would find that the scene was overlapping with each other. It was as if countless scenes of time were overlapping with each other. As for the space within, it was completely shattered. However, due to some inconceivable reason, it gathered together and maintained its original appearance. It looked no different from normal space. The talisman palm that Luo Fan condensed was similar to the shield that he condensed. On the other hand, the shield formed by countless layers of talismans could withstand the attack of Wu Daozi's magic treasure that surpassed the peak of quasi-sage level. In comparison, the power of the strange beast that Wu Daozi sent out was countless times weaker than the bronze ruler. As such, the result of this collision was very obvious. In an instant, the strange space within a 100-mile radius around Luo Fan and Wu Daozi collapsed with a loud bang, revealing a dark scene that seemed like nothingness. Then, Wu Daozi's entire body was like a cannonball. He flew out from the darkness and smashed into the ground not far away. This collision, it caused the entire Chelan cliff to shake violently. A human-shaped, bottomless pit instantly appeared at the place where the collision occurred. It was the force of the collision that crushed the strange beast. Then, it went past the beast and landed on Wu Daozi's body, causing him to fly backward. As for Wu Daozi, he was sent flying. The bronze ruler in his hand was shattered into pieces. Naturally, as he flew back, he could no longer continue to attack the shield that Luo Fan condensed. This allowed Luo Fan to win this exchange. Luo Fan floated in the void, and the aura around his body shook. In an instant, the void changed. That void completely disappeared and transformed back into normal spacetime. It didn't look any different from before. It was as if nothing had happened. At this moment, the hundreds of thousands of cultivators on the Chelan cliff looked at Luo Fan. It was like a normal person looking at a monster. It was a look of disbelief. It was a look that overturned one's worldview. To these cultivators, they submitted to Wu Daozi because Wu Daozi was a disciple of a sage. His power was something they couldn't defend against even if they worked together. Thus, they naturally felt that on the Chelan cliff, Wu Daozi was invincible. Wu Daozi was invincible, and there was absolutely no cultivator who could defeat him. Yet at this moment, the development of reality completely flipped their way of thinking. Wu Daozi, while fighting head-on, was knocked out by a foreign cultivator. He fell deep into the Chelan cliff, and no one knew if he was dead or alive. How could they accept this calmly? How could they not look at Luo Fan with this gaze? However, though they looked at Luo Fan with this gaze, they didn't dare to leave. The terrifying battle between Luo Fan and Wu Daozi had completely dispelled their thoughts of resisting. It made them realize that before Luo Fan and Wu Daozi, they were merely ants. There was no way they could win against them. What Luo Fan could do, they couldn't do. If they had any thoughts of escaping at this time, what awaited them would be becoming Wu Daozi's punching bag. The example of the central holy master was still in front of them. I didn't expect you to grow so much in just a few million years. This is really admirable. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly heard a faint voice coming from the void. He was very familiar with this voice. It was the voice he had heard millions of years ago. It was Zhang Zi's voice. Zhang Zi? I haven't seen you for millions of years. You are still as good as ever. Congratulations! When Luo Fan heard this voice, he turned his gaze to a spot in the void and smiled faintly. That place looked very normal and there was no strange thing at all. But with Luo Fan's extraordinary vision after becoming a Tao master, he could see that there was a strange spacetime hidden in that place. Song Muzi was in that spacetime. Hey, I have created this hiding method for countless years, but you can actually find it. It seems that you are stronger than I thought. In terms of perception, you can be ranked in the top 10 among the peers I have met for countless years. Song Muzi's figure gradually walked out of that spacetime and appeared in the void that Luo Fan was looking at. During the whole process, there was no abnormal fluctuation or any change in spacetime. It was so natural that it was beyond imagination. It was as if he had been standing there all along. You flatter me, fellow Taoist. I was only able to discover fellow Taoist traces because I had seen fellow Taoist before and knew of fellow Taoist's aura. Being able to sense auras is already very amazing. Ashen Muzi clicked his tongue in admiration. At this moment, Song Muzi was the same as he was millions of years ago. He still had the same sage-like temperament and an indescribable temperament. He stood there and smiled, as if the whole world was smiling at him. However, although fellow Taoist has become much stronger, isn't it a little inappropriate to ruin the saint's plan like this? Ashen Muzi changed the topic and said with a slight smile. Why do you say that? When have I ever ruined the saint's plan? Luo Fan smiled. Song Muzi chuckled. Wu Daozi is the person appointed by the saint to carry out the mission. If you kill him, aren't you destroying the saint's plan? No, no. Luo Fan said disapprovingly. My little magical power is nothing in the eyes of the disciples of the sage. How could fellow Taoist Wu Daozi die because of such a small technique? You must be joking. Just at this moment, there was a soft pu sound. On the Qilin cliff, the human-shaped hole suddenly shook, and a figure appeared in the void above the human-shaped hole. This person held a bronze ruler. There was no dust on his body and his aura was hidden. He floated in the void without a trace of embarrassment. It was Wu Daozi. At this moment, Wu Daozi's expression seemed calm, but there was anger hidden in his eyes. This anger wasn't just directed at Luo Fan but also at Song Muzi. So that's how it is. It looks like I misunderstood, fellow cultivator. Master Ashenwood looked at Wu Daozi's expression and acted like he was enlightened. Song Muzi, you better stop talking nonsense. If you want, then attack with me. Attack together with me. If you don't want it, then stay at the side. Wu Daozi said coldly. Ha! Dao friend Wu Daozi. Why are you so impatient and angry? This matter needs to be discussed at length. I see that there is only a small misunderstanding between you and Luo Fan. Just explain it and you can clear it up. There is no need to fight and destroy the harmony between the two of you. Song Muzi smiled. Song Muzi, you have to think carefully. This matter is not a small matter. This is not a small matter. Wu Daozi frowned and said to Master Ashenwood. Hearing this, Song Muzi laughed and didn't say anything. Luo Fan looked at the two of them and shook his head. Although Song Muzi's every word seemed to be mocking Wu Daozi, his true intention was to help Wu Daozi. His mockery towards Wu Daozi was like mockery between bad friends. He was just taking advantage of him verbally, but his heart was on his side. But so what? Perhaps he couldn't beat Wu Daozi or Song Muzi right now, but if he wanted to protect himself and leave, the two of them couldn't stop him. If that was the case, then why should he be afraid of them? So what if they attacked together? How lively! I didn't think I would encounter such a lively event after not coming out for a long time. I am so lucky. Just at this moment, a deep voice suddenly arose and entered the ears of Luo Fan and Wu Daozi. When the three of them heard this voice, their expressions changed. Luo Fan's complexion slightly changed because he felt the strong fighting intent contained in this voice. This battle intent had almost solidified. Just hearing this voice would make one's blood boil and make them want to fight against the heavens. Wu Daozi and Songmu Zi, on the other hand, recognized the owner of this voice. They seemed to know how troublesome this person was and felt a headache. There was a soft swoosh. From far away, a ray of golden light rushed over and landed next to Wu Daozi and Songmu Zi. It condensed into a human silhouette. This was a dark and skinny youth. He was at most 1.6 meters tall and looked like he could be blown away by the wind. However, at this moment, the youth's eyes were flashing with absolute battle intent. His body was tall and straight as he stood in the middle of the field. He was like a towering mountain, causing people to unknowingly forget about his height and his small stature. Luo Fan glanced at this person and knew that he was at the peak of the quasi-sage realm. His cultivation level was the same as Wu Daozi and Songmu Zi. Battle madman, weren't you trapped in the eye of the East Sea and unable to come out? Why are you here now? Wu Daozi was the master of Qilin Cliff after all. He frowned when he saw this person. Ha ha! I was trapped in the eye of the sea for 10 million years by master. That period just expired a few days ago. I didn't expect to see you two fighting as soon as I came out. I'm really lucky. Enough with the nonsense. What are you waiting for? Let's fight. The skinny youth spoke with the same deep voice that Luo Fan had just heard. What fight? We've already finished sparring. You should go back to where you came from. Wu Daozi frowned. You don't even know how to lie. I can clearly feel the battle intent and hostility between you two. If these two don't disappear, how can this fight end? Sparring? Who are you trying to fool? Battle madman said disdainfully. Luo Fan looked at Do Kuangzi, then looked at Wu Daozi and Master Ashen Mu, who were avoiding him. He couldn't help but feel curious. He didn't know what was so special about Do Kuangzi that made the two of them so afraid. Where is the battle intent and hostility? Feel it again. Where is the battle intent and hostility? Master Ashen Musi chuckled. Battle madman twitched his nose. He seemed to be smelling something. After a while, he said, the entire sky is filled with your rotten wood smell. It seems like your technique has improved again. Ha! Ashen Musi chuckled and didn't say anything else. Okay. There is no battle intent and hostility now. You should go to other places with battle intent and hostility. We still have things to do, so we won't entertain you. Wu Daozi said faintly. That's not up to you. Battle madman glanced at Wu Daozi. He then looked at Luo Fan and said, What is your name? Luo Fan. Luo Fan smiled. Luo Fan, a good name. Battle madman's eyes brightened. Nodding his head, he said. Then, he changed the topic. How was your battle just now? Who won and who lost? Just now, I only fought with fellow Taoist Wu Daozi. The winner hasn't been decided yet. Luo Fan didn't hide anything. The winner hasn't been decided yet? So if Songmu Zi joins in, you have a higher chance of losing? Battle madman laughed. Luo Fan didn't know why he said that. Though he was confident that even if Songmu Zi joined in, his life wouldn't be in danger, the possibility of losing was higher. Therefore, he nodded and agreed with Battle Madman. Just then, Wu Daozi and Songmu Zi's expressions changed. The energy inside their bodies moved as if they were brewing something. Right at this moment, Do Kuangzi laughed loudly and said, Good! If that's the case, then I'll join your side. This way, both sides will be more balanced, and the battle will be more satisfying. As he spoke, he waved his hand and a rod appeared in his hand. After that, he held the rod in his hand and smashed it towards Wu Daozi. The posture of this strike contained the mysteries of endless martial arts. Thousands of staff shadows appeared in the void, but these thousands of staff shadows were completely integrated into the long staff. It looked like the countless long staff shadows were completely grasped and integrated into the long staff. It seemed like the long staff's power was increased countless times. Wherever the rod passed, a thin layer of space-time was broken around the rod. The layer of shattered spacetime was like a thin film that wrapped around the long staff. It looked as if the countless long staff shadows were dyed with a layer of light. The spacetime outside the thin layer of shattered spacetime was not affected at all. It still looked the same as usual, as if nothing had changed. Wu Daozi's expression changed. Do Kuangzi, do you want to ruin my master's plan? As he spoke, he used his bronze ruler to block Battle Madman's rod. Battle Madman laughed. How can the saint's plan be so easily ruined? Perhaps my current actions are part of the saint's plan. Don't say anything, let's fight. Ha ha. As he spoke, his rod trembled in the void. The trajectory it passed through became more and more mysterious, exquisite, and complicated. The bronze ruler in Wu Daozi's hand possessed unparalleled power. Even if Wu Daozi were to casually strike with it, he would be able to hit any target. However, at that very moment, he had no choice but to merge all of his understanding of battle into the bronze ruler. He swung the ruler through the air in mysterious trajectories. Only then did he barely manage to block the long rod that was about to hit his head. This collision was almost soundless. Only the thin film of broken spacetime covering the surface of the staff changed subtly, as if it had been broken into more pieces and thickened. There were no changes to the bronze ruler, but Wu Daozi, who was holding the bronze ruler, trembled violently, as if he had been attacked by a powerful force. Good! Battle Madman roared, the battle intent in his eyes surging. I'm at a disadvantage, so you're helping me? All sorts of thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind. In the end, he understood why Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi were so vigilant and had such a headache when they saw Battle Madman. Looks like this person is simply a battle maniac. As long as he feels good, he won't be able to tell right from wrong. He doesn't care about friend or foe. Although he thought this, he had an interested smile on his face. Wu Daozi was not interested like Luo Fan at all. Instead, he was helpless and angry. He kept saying all sorts of reasons for Madman Do to stop. However, Madman Do didn't care. He just laughed and kept attacking Wu Daozi. Wu Daozi could only helplessly fight with him. Wu Daozi didn't know what to do. Ashen Muzi smiled bitterly. He watched the battle between Wu Daozi and Battle Madman with a knowing look in his eyes. Clearly, this wasn't the first time Battle Madman had done this. Luo Fan obviously wouldn't miss such a good opportunity. Even if Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi worked together against him, he was confident that he wouldn't die. However, if he wanted to defeat them, it would be extremely difficult. It could even be said to be impossible. Chapter 1033. The battle between Luo Fan and Wu Daozi was mainly to show that he had absolute strength and could regain his freedom. It was to show that any peak sage to be, even if it was a disciple of a sage, would have to pay an unimaginable price to deal with him. This was enough to make them feel that it was not worth it. This was the purpose of his battle. As for escaping and leaving the Qilin cliff, it was not difficult for Luo Fan. However, once he escaped and left the Qilin cliff, what awaited him was Wu Daozi's endless attacks and endless troubles. Only by defeating Wu Daozi and making him think that he could not deal with him, could he gain true freedom after leaving the Qilin cliff and not be attacked by him. It seemed that what Luo Fan needed now was a fair environment to fight against peak sage-to-be disciples of a sage. If Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi attacked together, it would be difficult for him to win. If he fought against both of them at the same time, what awaited Luo Fan was to be suppressed. That would not achieve the effect he wanted. Therefore, for Luo Fan, the fact that Do Kuangzi was holding Wu Daozi up was a great opportunity for Luo Fan. He could not let go of this opportunity. With these thoughts flashing through his mind, Luo Fan smiled and took a step forward. In an instant, his figure passed through the endless void and arrived in front of Ashen Muzi. He raised his hand and pressed it against Ashen Muzi's head. After the delay of the previous conversation, Luo Fan's physical state and strength had already recovered to its peak. He had completely recovered. For a Tao master, even if his body was completely destroyed, he could recover in an instant. Moreover, Luo Fan's body was only injured and not completely destroyed. As Luo Fan pressed his hand, countless three-dimensional talismans rushed out of his injured acupoint. In an instant, they condensed into a mysterious light in his hand. With a shocking destructive power, it directly pounced towards Ashen Mu Zi's head. This power was very mysterious, and the space-time fluctuation it caused was extremely weak. However, it was not like the moves of ordinary cultivators, which could not cause space-time fluctuations. Instead, it was because of his understanding of the previous battle. He had already comprehended many ways to completely suppress and eliminate the destructive power of spacetime. In fact, what he emitted was the radiance formed by three-dimensional talismans. If it truly erupted, it was enough to completely pulverize space and time within a radius of several million kilometers. Sensing the arrival of this light, Master Tsang Muzi's expression changed slightly. He raised a finger and a giant tree appeared out of thin air. It directly blocked the light. This huge piece of wood was extremely large, but it was very strange. It was directly compressed between Master Ashenwood and Luo Fan's palms, easily blocking the light emitted by Luo Fan's palms. In that instant, the giant tree suddenly began to shake unbelievably. As it trembled, countless wood shavings shot out in all directions. It looked as if the giant wood was made of countless wood shavings. Under the impact, the wood shavings that made up the giant wood could no longer gather together, and countless wood shavings began to leave the body of the giant wood. Seeing this, Master Tsang Muzi was shocked. He had never thought that Luo Fan, a cultivator who had just reached the pinnacle of the sage-to-be realm, could be so powerful. Although the magic he used was not the magic passed down by his master, it was a powerful magic that he had comprehended based on countless years of Tao enlightenment. Its destructive and defensive power was strong enough to destroy heaven and earth, and it could even withstand the destructive power of heaven and earth. However, at this moment, the light emitted from Luo Fan's palms was already enough to make the giant wood almost unable to withstand it. It looked as if it was about to completely collapse. This destructive power completely subverted his understanding of cultivation, causing his expression to change greatly. However, Master Tsang Muzi was a disciple of a sage after all, and he was in existence at the pinnacle of the sage-to-be realm. Seeing this, his body trembled, and he raised a finger. In an instant, countless thunderbolts in the void condensed into an ancient tree. It waved its branches and pounced towards Luo Fan, completely enveloping Luo Fan. The ancient tree formed by thunderbolts was so powerful that even the heavens, earth, and space-time seemed to tremble slightly. An aura of judgment was constantly being emitted from the ancient tree, filling up a radius of a few million miles. Even the void seemed to be trembling along with the brandishing of the branches of the thunderbolt ancient tree. Luo Fan's reaction was incomparably fast. His figure flashed and streaked across the void, dodging the brandishing branches one after another in the nick of time. However, his palm did not waver during this process, and continued to move towards Master Tsang Muzi. The giant wood that blocked the palm continued to collapse in the process, sending sawdust flying in all directions. However, Master Tsang Muzi was obviously not going to stay there and do nothing. His eyes flickered with a dark green light, and in a flash, he disappeared without a trace. It seemed as if he had re-entered the strange space-time that he had opened up. Luo Fan did not care about this at all. He had already seen where the space-time was, and with a thought, he raised his hand. The light formed by the three-dimensional talismans in his hand suddenly trembled violently. As it trembled, the giant wood directly collapsed and disappeared into nothingness. Then, he formed a strange hand seal with both hands. In an instant, countless three-dimensional talismans condensed into a bright red river in the void. It suddenly turned and rushed into the strange space-time that Master Tsang Muzi had opened up. As it entered, Master Tsang Muzi's angry snort came from the strange spacetime. Then, the entire spacetime collapsed and Master Tsang Muzi's figure directly appeared before Luo Fan. However, at this moment, he was holding a branch that looked like a pole. This was the magic treasure he had used to fight Wu Daozi's bronze ruler. Before this magic treasure was a bright red river that circled around like a dragon. It seemed to be looking for an opening to pounce and completely destroy Master Tsang Muzi. Master Tsang Muzi calmly said, "Although this space-time is ordinary, it is a concealment method that I spent millions of years to create. If you destroy it, you will have to pay the price." With that, he attacked with the magic treasure in his hand. In an instant, the void trembled. The bright red river was like a ribbon, twisting and turning as it was struck, unable to maintain a stable state. This bright red river was none other than the river of time that Luo Fan had created on the path of transcendence. It was a divine ability that allowed him to bring out all the profound mysteries of the tide of time to its greatest extent. Back when he was still cultivating the Tao of power that Tao Venerate Great Strength had inherited, this magic ability was a combination of many different powers. But at this moment, this magic ability was no longer a combination of powers. However, it was no longer a combination of forces, but countless three-dimensional talismans. When Luo Fan cultivated the way of power, he naturally used the combination of power in order to best display the power of the mysterious trend of the times. But at this moment, he had already cultivated the Tao fruit path created by the world-view of laws. Could bring out the best of its power. Naturally, it was composed of three-dimensional talismans. Moreover, Luo Fan's current cultivation realm was much higher than when he was on the transcendence path. It was already tens of thousands of times more profound. Under such circumstances, the power of the Time River was still tens of thousands of times stronger. Under such circumstances, the power of the Time River was also tens of thousands of times stronger than before. But even so, the Time River seemed powerless under the attack of Master Tsang Muzi's magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the demi-sage level. It could only keep dodging, unable to fight back. It could only keep dodging in the void, and then try its best to block the magic treasure's attack on Luo Fan. Seeing this, Master Tsang Muzi frowned. The tree branch in his hand kept spinning, drawing mysterious trajectories in the void, and evolving all kinds of martial arts and battle principles. At this time, Luo Fan not only had to control the river of time to resist the branch magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the sage-to-be level, but he also had to resist the attack of the ancient tree made of thunderbolts condensed by Ashen Muzi. At this time, his figure almost did not stop for a moment in the void. At every moment, he displayed the supreme mystery of dodging. His figure flickered in the void, leaving countless shadows. This can't go on. While Luo Fan was thinking about this, there were countless thoughts constantly flashing in his mind. The mysteries of the tide of the times, the mysteries of the aura rune structure, all of them were constantly emerging, and finally directly submerged his mind, making his whole mind completely immersed in the endless mysteries. With this change, his figure became more and more ethereal. In the end, he became like an ordinary willow branch, moving with the wind. No matter how the ancient tree's branches waved and attacked, they couldn't get within 3 feet of his body and hurt him. During this process, the time Changhe's dodging and intercepting became more and more elegant and more mysterious. This made Master Tsang Muzi's expression even more unsightly. At this moment, he completely understood what Wu Daozi had felt. Previously, he had seen Wu Daozi rush into the Qilin cliff because of Luo Fan's attack. He had thought that Wu Daozi had underestimated Luo Fan and that Luo Fan had taken advantage of his weakness, causing him to fail miserably. In fact, he didn't care much about Luo Fan. He only thought that as long as he attacked seriously and used all his strength to deal with Luo Fan, he would definitely be able to capture Luo Fan easily. However, He didn't expect that when he attacked seriously, the person in front of him was still so slippery. He couldn't use his full strength and couldn't finish him off in a short period of time. At this moment, he realized that Wu Daozi's failure was not a fluke. The newly ascended quasi-sage before him really had the ability to compete with them. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Master Tsangmu made up his mind. With a thought, the ancient tree that was attacking Luo Fan trembled slightly and turned into countless bolts of lightning. The bolts of lightning shrouded an area of 10,000 kilometers, directly wrapping Luo Fan within. Although this kind of attack was a large-scale attack, covering the sky and covering the earth, as if there was nowhere to hide. However, because there were small gaps between the lightning bolts, Luo Fan easily dodged the attack with a few flashes. When the lightning completely disappeared, Luo Fan was still floating in the void, unharmed. Master Tsangmu was not surprised by this. He didn't expect that such a large area attack would be able to finish off Luo Fan. The reason he turned the ancient tree into lightning was because he didn't want to use the ancient tree to attack Luo Fan. However, because he no longer wanted to use this ancient wood to attack Luo Fan, he planned to wholeheartedly control his magical weapon to subdue Luo Fan. At the last moment, he would make use of the waste, letting the thunder and lightning that made up this ancient wood display its final brilliance. It would be best if Luo Fan was injured a little, but if not, he would not be surprised. Awesome! At this moment, Crazy Doe's roar came from not far away. His body was surrounded by countless lightning bolts. These bolts of lightning wrapped around his body like water droplets falling on a lotus leaf. Although they shone brightly, although they were vast and boundless, they were still unable to move. Although they were boundless, they were extremely shocking. However, they couldn't shake his body at all. They couldn't cause any changes to his body. This was the moment when Master Tsangmu dispersed the ancient tree and turned it into countless lightning bolts that covered the sky. Those lightning bolts also submerged Wu Daozi and Crazy Doe. At this moment, Crazy Doe was acting like this. Even though the lightning bolts wrapped around his body, he wasn't affected at all. Wu Daozi, who was fighting against him, had an ugly expression on his face. At this time, his expression was very ugly, and he was constantly fighting Mad Fighter in the void with the bronze ruler in his hand. The lightning bolts that Master Tsangmu had shot out earlier couldn't hurt him at all. The moment they got close to his body, they were naturally eliminated by the power of the bronze ruler. The bronze ruler was even able to completely block the chaos that was similar to the state of primal chaos, let alone these lightning bolts that were far inferior. Wu Daozi gritted his teeth and said, "Crazy Doe, Master Tsangmu is at a disadvantage now. Why aren't you going to help him? Are you kidding me? Master Tsangmu is planning to use a big move now. How is he at a disadvantage?" Crazy Doe laughed. As he spoke, he twisted the rod in his hand. The countless bolts of lightning around him condensed on the rod, turning into a shadow of the rod. It brought with it countless space-time shards as it shot toward Wu Daozi. Wu Daozi revealed a helpless expression. He gently turned the bronze ruler in his hand and blocked the ruler. This caused time and space to tremble violently. It was as if time and space could not withstand the shock waves of the collision and was about to collapse. At this moment, Master Tsangmu took a deep breath. He was about to use the power of the second layer of the treasure when he suddenly noticed that the bright red river that Luo Fan had sent out suddenly trembled. It suddenly condensed in the void and turned into a normal-sized axe. This bright red river seemed to be boundlessly long, with no beginning or end. No one would think that it was wrong to say that it was millions and millions of miles long, and it wasn't wrong to say that it was only a few dozen feet long. At this moment, such a long bright red river condensed into such an ordinary-sized axe, causing its color to suddenly increase to an inconceivable level. The entire axe looked like a bright red jade. It was so red that it was sparkling and translucent. It was so red that it would make one's heart tremble. After the axe appeared, Luo Fan suddenly appeared in front of it. He grabbed the axe with one hand and swung it toward Master Tsongmuzi. This chop was like the chop Pangu used to split the heavens and earth. Wherever the axe went, time and space seemed to be afraid of it and naturally split apart to avoid it. Under this chop, all the light in the universe seemed to be attracted to it. The trajectory of the axe became extremely bright. The surrounding space, the entire world, and even the 10 suns in the sky seemed to become a lot dimmer. Even sunlight was like this, let alone the cultivators present. Almost all the cultivators, including those on the Qilin cliff who couldn't see the battle between Luo Fan and the others, couldn't help but cast their gazes towards the position of the axe. Although they couldn't see the true appearance of the axe and couldn't see the trajectory of the axe, they felt an unprecedented feeling of being close to the great Tao enveloping them. They couldn't help but want to see the trajectory of the axe clearly. They couldn't help but want to know who was the one who made this attack and what kind of mysteries this attack contained. Good! An incomparably excited shout filled with an endless will to fight pierced through time and space to reach the ears of all the cultivators present. This voice was naturally Madman Dou's voice. At this moment, Madman Dou had already stopped attacking Wu Daozi. Instead, he focused all his attention and perception on Luo Fan. More specifically, he focused on the axe that Luo Fan had unleashed. The power of this chop that seemed to split the heavens and earth was unimaginably powerful. In Luo Fan's senses, this chop had even split open the gap between the heavens and the earth, directly striking into the gap between the state of chaos and the world. He could even faintly sense that after the axe slashed through space and time, there was a mysterious existence that transcended time and space and was close to the state of chaos. So this can also allow one to transcend heaven and earth. Luo Fan's mind was filled with an indescribable satisfaction. The target of his axe was Master Tsongmuzi. Chapter 1034. At this moment, Master Tsongmuzi's eyes narrowed and the branch in his hand shook slightly. In an instant, a ray of light surged up and completely blocked the void in front of him. Bright red jade-like axe in Luo Fan's hand directly struck the colorful light. An indescribable power was generated from the colorful light. Everything around it, including time and space, seemed to be completely engulfed by the colorful light. The power contained in Luo Fan's axe went straight into the gap between the heaven and earth and the state of primal chaos. Its power was naturally powerful enough to destroy the heaven and earth. However, facing the engulfing power of the colorful light, facing the sweep of the colorful light, there was a feeling of chopping into a swamp. That kind of powerlessness, that kind of feeling of being unable to come out, made Luo Fan frown. However, he only frowned and the axe in his hand shook slightly. Countless grayish existences appeared on the blade of the axe. It was as if the axe had connected a place filled with grayish existences to the world in front of the axe, causing them to surge out of that place and enter the world. The power of the colorful light was earth-shattering. However, at this moment, Master Tsongmuzi felt a strange feeling that he had never felt before. The colorful light, which would not have increased in weight even if a mountain or a continent were to be completely engulfed, suddenly became extremely heavy. Even though he was at the peak of the Sage-to-be realm, he still felt that he could not bear this degree of weight. He had to hold the branch with both hands. He used all the strength in his body to lift it up. In the end, he was barely able to hold the branch and the colorful light, so that the branch and the colorful light did not fall out of his control due to the increase in strength. At this moment, he felt as if the whole world was pressing down on the branch in his hand. He was trying his best to hold up the whole world. When this feeling appeared, the light in Master Tsongmuzi's eyes froze. The power in his body surged. Raising his eyes to look at Luo Fan, his expression had already become one of shock. He had never heard of such a method before, nor had he experienced it before. The thing in his hand. It seemed to be formed by the condensation of power. It was not even a real thing. It was not even a magic treasure, but it could display such a terrifying magic power and resist the power of the second layer of the magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the sage-to-be realm. It seemed that it had the upper hand. How could he not be shocked? Luo Fan also frowned slightly at this time. Although he was happy that his era's great axe was able to block the rainbow light, he felt a headache. With the cover of the colorful light, Master Tsang Muzi was almost invincible. It was almost impossible for him to break through the colorful light and hurt Master Tsang Muzi. For Luo Fan, who wanted to defeat Master Tsang Muzi and Wu Daozi, and let them know that he was not to be trifled with, this was something that he could not accept. With this thought in mind, he shook his hands and the axe in his hand turned slightly. He suddenly slashed at the colorful light and his body turned. In the blink of an eye, he had already circled around Master Tsang Muzi several times. The axe directly left several circles of gray axe marks on the colorful light. When Master Tsang Muzi sensed Luo Fan's movement, he naturally controlled the colorful light to change into a sphere. He wrapped his body in it and completely blocked the attack of the axe. As a result, the marks of the axe attached to the colorful light made it seem as if the spherical colorful light had been corroded by something, causing the originally mysterious and natural colorful light to become full of holes, as if it was in ruins. "Condense!" Luo Fan shouted. In an instant, the grayish traces left on the colorful light seemed to have come alive. They broke off everywhere, forming countless small and short grayish lines. Then, they condensed in an extremely complicated and mysterious way and linked together on the colorful light. In the blink of an eye, it actually formed a three-dimensional talisman. This 3D talisman was completely in the shape of the colorful light, which was the spherical shape that wrapped around Master Tsang Muzi. This spherical 3D talisman was extremely complicated, and the number of lines within it was unimaginable. The appearance of the 3D talisman that was outlined by these countless lines would cause an ordinary person to feel dizzy from just looking at it, and it was even to the extent that one's head would explode from being unable to endure the complexity. After such a three-dimensional talisman was formed, it began to give birth to endless power. In an instant, it drew in the endless grayish existence in the gap between the heaven and the earth and the chaotic state. It began to spread out from the inside of the three-dimensional talisman like the Milky Way, filling up the interior of the three-dimensional talisman crazily. The 3D talisman was clearly wrapped around Master Tsang Muzi and the colorful light he emitted. At this moment, when the gray existence was about to fill the 3D talisman, it was naturally equivalent to the gray existence wanting to completely drown Master Tsang Muzi and the colorful light emitted by the branch. This gray existence was the boundary between the normal world and the chaotic state. It was a wondrous existence with both the normal world and the chaotic state. This existence contained traces of the chaotic state. If one could not comprehend some of the mysteries of the chaotic state, they would not be able to resist this existence. Although Master Ashen Muzi was at the peak of the sage-to-be and was much stronger than Luo Fan in terms of cultivation, he cultivated the orthodox way of cultivation. It was a cultivation method that was limited to this world. He had not even sorted out his own worldview, so it was impossible for him to sense such a wonderful existence. He could not even sense the primal chaos state, so how could he understand some of the mysteries of the primal chaos state? Even if he could deduce some of the mysteries of chaos through other methods, such as using a method to deduce some of the mysteries of chaos, compared to directly comprehending the mysteries of chaos, there would definitely be countless omissions, and it would be impossible to perfect it. As a result, to him, the gray existence in the gap between the primal chaos and heaven and earth was fatal to a peak quasi-saint like Tsang Muzi. It was impossible for him to resist it. If he was surrounded by these existences without any defense, he could only rely on the various preparations he had made in the past and abandon everything to escape. Fortunately, at this moment, Master Tsang Muzi was not surrounded by the gray existence without any defense. Around his body, there was still the colorful light protecting him. These colorful lights, they were emitted by the branch that looked like a shoulder pole. This was the second power of the branch. The branch itself was a magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of the sage to be level. One could imagine how powerful the second power of such a magic treasure was. Master Tsang Muzi did not have any concept of the gray existence. He did not comprehend anything. However, the existence of the colorful light. It was still enough to resist the invasion of the gray existence. It allowed him to exist in the three-dimensional seal unharmed. However, that was all it could do. If he had some understanding of this hazy gray existence, and had some understanding of its profundities, he wouldn't have been able to do so. With the power of the magic treasure that far surpassed his cultivation realm, he could easily disintegrate the three-dimensional seal and the gray existence's threat to him. However, he did not. Although the power of the colorful light was limitless, facing the three-dimensional talisman was like an adult facing a lock of Luban. All the conditions of this adult were enough to allow him to unlock the lock of Luban, but if he did not know the trick, he would not be able to unlock it no matter what. Master Tsang Muzi was facing such an awkward situation. He floated in the colorful light with the branch that looked like a shoulder pole in his hand. Around the colorful light was a patch of gray. Although the dusky existence appeared to be a thin layer on the outside, it was completely attached to the colorful light. However, from Ashen Muzi's point of view, this gray existence was boundless. His entire body, along with the rainbow light, seemed to have sunk into a gray world. No matter where he went, no matter how many millions of miles he traveled, he could not escape the gray existence. What is this existence? Why can't I even touch the brilliant tree? Master Tsang Muzi's mind was filled with doubt and shock. The magic treasure in his hand was called the brilliant tree. It was a magic treasure given to him by a sage. It contained the mysteries of the way of the sage. Just the mysteries within it were enough for him to comprehend for countless years. If he could fully comprehend the mysteries contained within it one day, he would naturally be able to become a sage. At this moment, although he had only comprehended the second mysteries of the brilliant tree and unleashed its second power, this power was enough to make him invincible among those below the sage level. Of course, his opponent had to not have a magic treasure of the same level, nor did they have the same level of power and talent. But even so, this kind of power that could annihilate everything had no effect on the grayish existence around him. No matter how he tried to activate the power of the lustrous wondrous tree, he couldn't destroy it and let himself escape. How could he not be shocked? How could he not be puzzled? These existences are both chaotic and orderly. It's like the chaos that Master has described, but it's also like a normal world. Time, space, matter, and energy are all in chaos, but they also seem to follow some complicated pattern. Just what is this? Thoughts flashed through Ashen Muzi's mind as he tried to figure out what this existence was. However, how could it be that simple? Although he was a peak quasi-saint and a disciple of a sage, this kind of gray existence was a completely new domain for him. The various principles that he had learned in the past had instead become obstacles for him at this moment. They would pop up from the depths of his memory from time to time, making it extremely difficult for him to comprehend and study this gray existence. It was difficult for him to gain anything. Based on his current speed, it would take him at least 100 billion years to truly understand the mysteries within and understand the true reason behind the existence of this hazy gray mist. Obviously, Luo Fan would not give him that much time. Even the world would not give him that much time. After 6 billion years, the world would shatter. As long as he did not escape by then, one could imagine the fate that awaited him. Master Tsang Muzi studied it for a while and understood this point. His expression could not help but change greatly. Then, he smiled bitterly. I didn't expect that I would be defeated by a peak quasi-saint who had just become a peak quasi-saint. This person's magical power is omnipotent. Thinking of this, he shrank the colorful light and stopped trying to destroy the gray existence around him. He also stopped trying to comprehend the mysteries of the gray existence. He only shrank it to protect himself. It was obvious that he had completely admitted defeat. The three-dimensional talisman that Luo Fan had condensed was drawn out by the act. This was the gray existence that existed in the gap between the world and the state of chaos. This existence was completely different from his own power. It was even more chaotic. Its power was even more terrifying. If he did not have the great axe of time that was condensed from the river of time, he would not have been able to trigger that existence, let alone condense it into a three-dimensional talisman. However, when he condensed these existences into a three-dimensional talisman, he could naturally comprehend the various things inside the three-dimensional talisman through this three-dimensional talisman. He could even see through the gray existence. Through the colorful light, he could see Master Tsang Muzi's performance. When Master Tsang Muzi completely shrank the colorful light and did not move, Luo Fan instantly realized this. He immediately heaved a sigh of relief. He completely understood that Master Tsang Muzi's performance meant that he had completely admitted defeat. However, for him, this was only a benefit in name. With the protection of the colorful light, even if Master Tsang Muzi admitted defeat and did not resist, he could not do anything to him. It was impossible to break through the protection of the colorful light and hurt Master Tsang Muzi. If it was truly a battle of life and death, and no one else would intervene in the battle, he would naturally be able to directly throw it into the gap between heaven and earth and primal chaos, allowing the boundless gray existence to corrode it, thus delaying him for hundreds of millions of years. But at this moment, he could not do that. At this moment, he was on the Qilin cliff, and there were 7 great sages in this world. Although the 7 great sages had never appeared and never showed their existence to Luo Fan did not dare to think that they really did not care about anything in this world. Those sages were high and mighty and controlled everything. If they wanted to kill the current Luo Fan, they did not even need to make a move. Just a glance was enough to destroy Luo Fan's body and soul. It was even possible that countless traces of the existence of time and space would be completely erased. In the past millions of years, those sages did not care about Luo Fan at all. No matter what the reason was, it did not mean that they would never care about what Luo Fan did. If Luo Fan went too far, such as directly suppressing Master Tsang Muzi in the gap between the world and the state of chaos, which aroused a trace of dissatisfaction in a certain sage and made that sage want to harm him on a whim, the result that awaited him was probably the most tragic one. Regardless of whether this possibility was high or not, Luo Fan would not take this risk if it was not necessary. Therefore, after knowing that Master Tsang Muzi had admitted defeat and no longer resisted, Luo Fan showed a relaxed expression and turned to look at Wu Daozi and Madman Do not far away. Madman Do looked at Luo Fan with a dangerous light in his eyes and said, "Looks like you were right, Master Tsang Muzi really lost." Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly had a bad premonition. Wu Daozi's eyes brightened and said, "Then what are you waiting for?" Madman Do nodded and said, "I really cannot wait any longer. If I wait any longer, the battle will be over." After saying that, he gave a light shout and slightly shook the long stick in his hand. His figure crossed the void in an instant, and the long stick in his hand somehow arrived in front of Luo Fan, smashing towards Luo Fan's head and face. Now Luo Fan finally understood what Wu Daozi and Master Tsang Muzi felt. An indescribable annoyance suddenly appeared in his mind. He couldn't help but curse, "This person is really crazy." However, since the staff was already in front of him, he naturally couldn't let it hit him. The bright red great axe of the era in his hand suddenly turned and drew a mysterious trajectory in the void. Although it didn't have the momentum that seemed to be able to split heaven and earth apart, it still had a certain charm. Time and space seemed to have naturally dodged it and automatically separated in front of the axe blade, making it seem as if the axe didn't need to go through time and space. It directly appeared in front of the axe and directly collided with the long staff that was wrapped in a layer of space-time fragment film. At the moment of the collision, there was a soft pop sound. A grayish existence appeared from where the two collided and turned into a ripple that spread in all directions. It directly passed through the bodies of Luo Fan and Madman Do. It also passed through the body of Wu Daozi, who was about to attack Luo Fan. This grayish existence didn't affect Luo Fan at all. For him, it was like a spring breeze. However, for Madman Do and Master Tsang Muzi, it was not the case. In that instant, both of their expressions stiffened. Their bodies seemed to have been bombarded by a huge force, and they were pushed back by the ripples. They retreated several kilometers away, and only stopped when the ripples dissipated. In an instant, the two of them exclaimed at the same time, "What is this existence?" Among them, the one with the worst expression was Master Tsang Muzi. Chapter 1035. The great axe of the ages in Luo Fan's hand collided with the long staff in Do Guangxi's hand. The grayish existence that was triggered by the collision was not ordinary. It was the kind of grayish existence that was formed when the world was shattered. Instead, it was a kind of existence that was formed when the world and the state of chaos permeated and influenced each other. This kind of strange existence was not something that Wu Daozi and the others had ever experienced. If they used their own strength correctly, they would naturally be able to completely resist it. However, they could not use it correctly at all. Naturally, they were extremely fragile in front of this existence and could not resist it at all. "Great!" After Do Guangxi exclaimed, he shouted even more excitedly. For him, fighting was the main rhythm of life. His cultivation was fighting, and fighting was his life. Being able to have a wonderful and intense battle was a wonderful thing for him. The stronger Luo Fan was, the more he could enjoy the fun of fighting. Naturally, the better it was. After he shouted, the long staff that had been broken turned again, leaving an afterimage in the void. It directly blasted towards Luo Fan's chest. In the collision just now, the grayish existence caused by the great axe of the ages did not have much effect on him. However, the power contained in Do Guangxi's long staff caused him a lot of damage, causing his body to stiffen in the void for a while. He even faintly felt that his internal organs, his strength, his spirit, and his will were all damaged by the bombardment of this staff. Fortunately, Do Guangxi had retreated for a while before recovering to attack him. He had to seize the time to recover. By this time, he had completely recovered, and his fighting strength had not been weakened in the slightest. In the face of such a long stick, the axe in Luo Fan's hand trembled and swayed in the void, and all kinds of martial arts mysteries were displayed between his axe. One after another, mysterious trajectories, and one after another, mysterious axe shadows constantly collided with the long stick in Mad Fighter's hand. The trajectory of the axe in Luo Fan's hand contained the mysteries of martial arts that were enough to set off a bloody storm in the cultivation world. The fighting method that Do Guangxi displayed when he waved his long staff was also no less than the martial arts principles displayed by the bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand. It was also enough to set off a bloody storm in the cultivation world. The battle between the two was really evenly matched. They were locked in a stalemate. The sky and the earth turned upside down, and the sun and moon lost their light. Wave after wave of grayish existence spread in all directions as the axe and the long staff collided, creating circles of ripples. Wu Daozi, who wanted to find an opportunity to join the attack, could only use the bronze ruler in his hand to constantly resist these grayish existence. He could not find an opportunity to join the battle, let alone subduing Luo Fan. He stood on the side, watching the battle between Luo Fan and Do Guangxi. The bronze ruler in his hand trembled slightly. Every time he wanted to join the battle, there would either be a grayish existence rushing towards him, forcing him to resist, or he would find that Do Guangxi had already attacked. The opportunity he saw before had completely disappeared, so he could only find another opportunity to join the battle. Wu Daozi floated in the void. Below him was the almost endless Qilin cliff. Although the aftermath of their battle caused the space and time to change, making it impossible for the people below to see the scene of their battle clearly, this kind of grievance still made him feel very annoyed. The anger in his heart was constantly accumulating. As time passed, the battle between Luo Fan and Do Guangxi became more and more intense. As the battle continued, the grayish existence that Luo Fan had triggered had less and less effect on Do Guangxi. This was not because Do Guangxi understood the mysteries of this grayish existence more and more. Instead, it was because Do Guangxi's outstanding battle instincts allowed him to gradually adapt to the method that Luo Fan used to trigger this grayish existence. This allowed him to resist the influence of this existence according to Luo Fan's method of triggering it. It was just like a martial artist facing an endless rain of arrows. If he was fast enough, observant enough, and had a good grasp of timing, he could leisurely stroll through the endless rain of arrows. This way, the rain of arrows could not pose a threat to him. However, this did not mean that the rain of arrows would not affect the warrior. This was the case for Do Guangxi at this moment. If he were to directly come into contact with this gray hazy existence, there would still be some consequences. At the very least, he would be blasted back. However, he was able to use various methods to avoid these gray hazy existences and easily avoid being affected by these gray hazy existences. Do Guangxi's battle instincts allowed him to do this. Naturally, Luo Fan, who had outstanding attainments in martial arts, would not be without any gains. Through this period of fighting with Do Guangxi, Luo Fan gradually became familiar with the form of Do Guangxi's power. After the collision, he was no longer in a state of shock and stiffness like at the beginning. Instead, he was able to easily divert these forces so that his body would not be affected in the slightest. For Do Guangxi, this kind of stalemate was naturally an extremely satisfying battle. It allowed him to fight for 100 years while laughing and shouting excitedly. However, for Luo Fan, this kind of battle was not a bad thing. At least, it allowed him to better understand what kind of divine sense and power a peak sage-to-be had, as well as the specific differences between a peak sage-to-be and a Tao master. Therefore, during this battle, the two of them became more and more happy and immersed in it. Eventually, they even gradually forgot about Qilin Cliff, Wu Daozi, and Ashen Muzi. Wu Daozi waited on the side for dozens of days. Finally, when he found that the battle between Luo Fan and Do Guangxi seemed to be able to continue indefinitely, he finally could not bear it any longer. He snorted coldly and shook the bronze ruler in his hand. Suddenly, a huge shadow flashed across the bronze ruler. This shadow was a huge human figure that filled the world. It held a ruler in its hand, as if it was measuring the Great Way. The face of this figure was blurry, and there seemed to be countless shadows of strange beasts flashing around it. After it appeared, the void within a radius of millions of miles seemed to be shrouded in a strange atmosphere. It seemed that the heaven and earth in this area had been included in some strange rules. All kinds of inexplicable changes were happening with the ruler in the hand of the shadow. After the shadow was formed, Wu Daozi waved the bronze ruler in his hand and pointed at the gray existence that was surrounding them in a ring. It even shattered the surrounding space, and used a terrifying power to forcibly suppress the battle. To be more specific, it pointed at Luo Fan, who was fighting fiercely with Do Guangxi. He seemed to be a little excited and happy. Following this point, the huge shadow that came out of the bronze ruler gently turned the ruler in its hand and compared it to Luo Fan, as if it was measuring something. Amidst this change, Luo Fan suddenly felt his whole body shake. It was as if the Great Way had suddenly wrapped around him and produced countless arms to grab him. It was as if it wanted to fix him in the void and start to play with him. An indescribable sense of danger shrouded him. He instantly understood that if he did not do something, what awaited him would be. His body and soul would be destroyed. Not good. A thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He had already noticed the change in Wu Daozi. He knew that this was the mysterious power of the bronze ruler. His eyes flashed with seriousness. At this moment, he was chopping down on Do Guangxi's head. Seeing this, the bright red great axe of the era in his hand turned slightly. The mysterious trajectory of the axe turned a subtle arc in the void and directly chopped into the void. It split open the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. As the gap was split open, an endless amount of grayish existences gushed out from it. Covering the sky and covering the earth, it enveloped a radius of 10,000 li around his body. This range not only included Luo Fan, but also Wu Daozi, the gray three-dimensional seal that Ashen Wood Master was in, and Do Guangxi. When this gray existence wrapped around his body, Luo Fan felt his body relax. It was the feeling of being locked on by the Great Way. The feeling of being manipulated by the Great Way completely disappeared. What replaced it was an indescribable sense of ease. Good move. However, if you want to escape like this, you are delusional. Wu Daozi sneered, and the bronze ruler in his hand suddenly slashed. Just as the gray existence was about to drown him, the huge human figure that appeared on the bronze ruler turned slightly. The ruler in its hand shook slightly, and the surrounding gray existence scattered in all directions at a speed visible to the naked eye. It formed a larger and larger space around Wu Daozi. This space was not the same as the space in the outside world. This space that was expanding in all directions had countless squares and seemed to have countless scales. Even time and space seemed to have become some kind of scale. One could even faintly see countless clocks in this space. After this space appeared, it continued to spread forward. In the blink of an eye, it had already enveloped Luo Fan in this space. In an instant, countless scales appeared on Luo Fan's body. One could even faintly see countless geometric patterns appearing on his body. It looked like the real world had suddenly become a three-dimensional coordinate model in a computer. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt that there was a lot of information on his body that was spreading in all directions. All of his body's secrets seemed to be starting to leave his body. They were becoming clearer and more obvious to the world. Good. Now Wu Daozi has the upper hand again. At this moment, an excited roar entered Luo Fan's ears. Hearing this, Luo Fan immediately knew what was going on. It was Wu Daozi seeing that he was in such a situation and thought that he was at a disadvantage. It seemed like he wanted to help Luo Fan. However, no matter what he did, Luo Fan could not do anything to stop all of his body's secrets from spreading. He could not allow himself to be controlled by Wu Daozi. He suddenly spun the axe in his hand, and the axe instantly chopped out millions of times around his body. These millions of axes' trajectories were blurry. They directly outlined a complex and mysterious three-dimensional seal. It directly wrapped his entire body in it. After the three-dimensional seal appeared, the space inside and outside the three-dimensional seal was completely separated. The strange space outside could no longer invade the three-dimensional seal. Naturally, it could not corrode Luo Fan's body. This caused the information that was constantly leaking out of Luo Fan's body to stop. The feeling that his body's secrets were unreservedly revealed completely disappeared without a trace. This was obviously also temporary. Although the three-dimensional talisman was composed of a grayish existence, the power of the rectangular spacetime displayed by the bronze ruler was too powerful. Although the three-dimensional seal was formed, it was still under extremely terrifying pressure. Crackling sounds could be heard from the three-dimensional talisman, as if it could collapse and be destroyed at any time. Facing such a situation, how could Luo Fan dare to relax? The axe in his hand kept moving. More and more blurry existences were triggered by his axe from the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. They formed three-dimensional seal after three-dimensional seal. Layer after layer of 3D talisman was formed inside the 3D talisman, combining with the 3D talisman that was formed at the beginning in an extremely subtle and mysterious way, making the 3D talisman that was protecting him seem to have more and more layers. Because of this change, the three-dimensional seal's shaky feeling of being destroyed at any time became smaller and smaller. The crackling sounds also became shorter and shorter. Finally, when the layers of the three-dimensional talisman reached 990,000, the clicking sound finally disappeared completely. The three-dimensional seal had finally completely stabilized. It had completely withstood the pressure of the surrounding rule space. At this moment, Luo Fan was in the mood to look outside. This time, he could not help but smile bitterly. It turned out that at this time, outside the three-dimensional seal, Crazy Do and Wu Daozi were fighting again. Wu Daozi waved the bronze ruler in his hand, and the huge human figure in the air waved the ruler with one hand. The other hand displayed all kinds of unfathomable and profound hand seals. Profound martial arts were constantly attacking Mad Dozi. As for the rule space, at this time it had stopped spreading. It just wrapped around the area where Luo Fan and Crazy Do were. At this time, Crazy Do's body was wrapped in an extremely strange blood-red light. This blood-red light was only a thin layer, tightly wrapped around his body and the long rod. What was revealed on it was an indescribable battle intent, containing a shocking iron-blooded aura. This battle intent, this aura, completely isolated the surrounding rule space from the erosion of Crazy Do. This allowed Crazy Do to move in the rule space effortlessly as if he was in a normal spacetime. At this time, the long rod in his hand was constantly waving in the void. Every time he waved it, there would be a blood-red light that left the long rod. It flashed through the air in mysterious trajectories and attacked Wu Daozi's shadow that surged out of the bronze ruler, attacking Wu Daozi's body. The form of the blood-red light was like a long rod. They looked like long rods with astonishing power. Even the rectangular spacetime couldn't resist the changes. The squares and scales that existed in the spacetime were distorted and assimilated by the blood-red light. Every time the blood-red light passed through, a portion of the spacetime would return to normal, forcing the humanoid figure to swing the rectangular ruler in his hand to repair the damage to the rectangular spacetime. The blood-red light of the long rod was like that to the rule space, but it didn't cause much damage to the humanoid phantom and Wu Daozi. The empty arm of the humanoid phantom swayed, displaying all kinds of hand seals. The martial arts were subtle and profound. Although it wasn't extremely easy, it wasn't very difficult either. The countless blood-red rod phantoms that were waved by the long rod were completely destroyed. The long rod phantoms couldn't hurt the phantom at all, let alone Wu Daozi. Crazy Do, what the hell are you doing? You'll deal with whoever wins. If this goes on, when will this battle end? Wu Daozi was so depressed at this time that he roared. He had managed to restrain Luo Fan within the three-dimensional seal charm with great difficulty, and now was the time to harvest the fruits of victory. But how could Madman Do actually interfere, making him unable to spare any energy to deal with Luo Fan? One could imagine how depressing such a thing was for him. Why do I have to fight? I want to fight until the end of time, until the world is destroyed. Ha ha! Crazy Do laughed loudly. His excitement, his determination, and his fighting spirit could be clearly sensed by ordinary people, let alone an existence like Wu Daozi. Hearing Crazy Do's words, the irritation in Wu Daozi's eyes became even more intense. He wasn't a fighting maniac. Fighting until the end of time, until the world was destroyed? This was simply the cruelest torture for him. How could he be willing? How could he be willing? You lunatic! He roared and waved the bronze ruler in his hand rapidly. The humanoid phantom that surged out of the bronze ruler moved even faster and more powerful. Good! Crazy Do felt the increasing pressure, but he still roared. Instead, his fighting spirit rose even more, and his voice became even more excited. Correspondingly, The movements of the long rod in his hand became increasingly exquisite. The blood-red light that gushed out from it became even more condensed, and its might became even more powerful. Chapter 1036. The incomparably furious Wu Dao Zi's movements became even more intense. The power of the second layer of the ruler in his hand was continuously activated by him. That power was truly earth-shattering. It caused the entire world to undergo various indescribable changes as he displayed it. At this time, Luo Fan was protected in the center by the gray layers of three-dimensional talismans, completely isolating the outside world from the influence of the matrix spacetime. His whole body floated there, closely watching the battle between Wu Dao Zi and Mad Do Zi. The battle between the two of them contained the profoundness of countless pinnacle sage-to-be, which made Luo Fan gain a lot from watching. He felt that his horizons were broadened as the battle progressed. As for the conversation between Mad Do and Wu Dao Zi, he didn't care. After a few days of fighting with Mad Do, he knew that Mad Do was a battle maniac. Fighting was his cultivation. Fighting was his joy. Only in battle could he feel the truth. For normal cultivators, leisure and cultivation were the norm. Battles were the embellishments that they had no choice but to do. But for a battle maniac, fighting was the norm. Only leisure and cultivation were the embellishments that he had no choice but to do. With such a mentality, it was naturally better for him to fight for as long as possible. In fact, it would be best for him to fight from the beginning of the world's creation until the world was destroyed and the world was destroyed. He even faintly felt that Wu Dao Zi had never tried to understand Crazy Do before. How could he not even know this? He even needed to ask Crazy Do about this. After watching for a while, Luo Fan shifted his gaze. He turned to look at Master Ashen Musi, who was wrapped in the ruler spacetime and sealed in the three-dimensional talisman he had created with a gray existence. The three-dimensional talisman was still there. It was gray and extremely complicated. When it fell into the ruler spacetime, it was like a little gray duckweed falling into the ocean. It was constantly fluctuating along with the square in the ruler spacetime, but it was not affected by the square and the ruler spacetime at all. If there are no external forces involved in this battle, I will be able to kill all of them. It should go on for a very, very long time. Right now, it was impossible for Wu Dao Zi to break away from the battle. Unless he's ruthless enough to let Madman Do trample on him without resisting, then it's a different story. When Luo Fan saw that Master Ashen would show no signs of breaking out of the seal, this thought flashed through his mind. With Do Guangzi's cultivation realm, with his personality, with his strength, he joined the battle between Luo Fan, Wu Dao Zi, and Ashen Musi. It was as if a balance had appeared between the three countries. Whichever side's situation was worse, he would help that side and balance the situation. Whichever side had the upper hand, he would attack that side, similarly balancing the situation. If this went on, it was obvious that the battle would continue until an external force broke the balance. You guys fight first. I'll take a break and comprehend it first. After thinking this through, Luo Fan smiled and murmured to himself. With that said, he began to focus his attention on the ruler spacetime in front of him. This ruler spacetime was completely different from all the spacetimes he had seen in the past. The ability that the bronze ruler used to construct the ruler spacetime was also different from all the abilities he had seen in the past. For Luo Fan, this was obviously an opportunity to broaden his horizons. It would allow him to comprehend the mysteries that he had never understood before, and it would allow his cultivation to improve to an extent that he could not have imagined in the past. Just as Luo Fan's clone joined the seemingly endless battle in this universe that had yet to shatter and become the Earth, in the Age of Chaos, which was billions of trillions of years away from this moment. In the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos, Luo Fan's body was undergoing earth-shattering changes. Because the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos contained the mysteries of heaven and earth itself, it contained the aura of chaos, and its nature became extremely mysterious. It could transcend time and space, allowing the practitioners who could see through this gap to have a perception that transcended time, break through the limitations of the era, and perceive all kinds of things that happened billions of years ago. Before this, Luo Fan had been using this characteristic to connect with his clone. He had seen all the experiences of his clone, and he was aware of all the senses and changes of his clone. Whether it was when he was cultivating inside the talisman, when he clashed with Wu Daozi, when he saw the battle between Wu Daozi and Master Ashenwood, or even when he obtained the aura from the Tao Comprehension praying mat and sank into the endless space of runes, it was as if he had personally experienced it. Not a single thing was left out. Similarly, the various gains of his doppelgangers were also his own gains. When his clone broke through the realm shackles and broke through the end of the transcendent realm to peacefully step into the Tao Master realm, Luo Fan's body, which was billions of years later, also made a breakthrough. At the same time, his cultivation realm broke through the realm shackles, and he also instantly stepped into the Tao Master realm, becoming a supreme Tao Master. At this time, he sat cross-legged on the three-dimensional talisman outside the law realm, and his body began to emit a mysterious aura. This aura contained endless mysteries and endless power. The moment it appeared, the grayish existence in the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos began to churn endlessly. Vaguely, the dusky existences in the surroundings of this world seemed to be being pushed away. I didn't expect that in the end, I would still be able to obtain such great benefits by relying on this doppelganger and break through the strongest shackles of the realm before becoming a saint. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. Then, his entire mind was completely drowned by the mysterious feeling brought about by the Tao Master realm. Endless supreme mysteries, the principles of the universe, and the mysteries of chaos were born out of thin air in that instant, drowning his entire mind and consciousness, making him feel as if he had been plunged into an endless sea of mysteries in that instant. What he saw, what he felt, what he heard, what his body touched, what his mouth tasted, and what his nose smelled were all mysteries that he had pondered over in the past but failed to obtain. In that instant, his view of the world was greatly perfected. Looking up, the range of the state of chaos that he could sense had also greatly increased. Among them, the mysteries that he could comprehend from the state of chaos. It had also greatly increased. And his body, his strength, his will, and his perception, his divine soul, everything about him. At the same time, there was a shocking change, and all of them instantly improved by many times. In the blink of an eye, he felt that he could easily crush his previous self. However, even so, he didn't feel that he had become very powerful. This wasn't contradictory to his strength. He didn't feel that he had become very powerful, which meant that his improvement was completely under his absolute control. He still had perfect control over his own strength and everything about himself, just like in the past. Naturally, he would not feel powerful when he could perfectly control his strength. This was like an ordinary person who grew up from a child to an adult. His feeling of his own strength was actually the same. If there was no other strength to compare, there was absolutely no difference between an adult and a child in terms of their own strength. So, this is the Tao Master. Luo Fan let out a long sigh. At this time, when he looked at the Great Way again, he naturally had a feeling of looking down. Although the Great Way was grand and vast, he still seemed so small compared to it. However, he had a feeling that the Great Way could no longer affect him, and any changes in the Great Way could no longer affect him. He had already become an existence that was even more noble than the Great Way. This feeling is just too wonderful, Luo Fan murmured with an extremely satisfied smile on his face. A kind of great perfection, great freedom, and great freedom filled his mind and mind. At this moment, Luo Fan was standing on the three-dimensional seal around the law realm. He slightly opened his arms and closed his eyes. There was a satisfied smile on his face, as if he was enjoying an incomparably wonderful feeling. Tens of thousands of years had passed since he started paying attention to the clone that had existed billions of years ago. After all, it was time that separated the main body from the clone, not space. Therefore, the time that the two experienced was naturally not synchronized. It could even be said that if Luo Fan was willing, he could even directly pay attention to the various encounters of the doppelganger at any point in time. After all, for the main body, everything that the doppelganger had encountered had already happened. As long as there was a connection between the doppelganger and the main body, there was no difference at all. However, that was not necessary. After all, since it had already happened, what was the point of wasting some time to comprehend every bit of the clone's experience? Anyway, it would not affect anything, so it was better to follow the clone to comprehend the various senses and changes. As for understanding the clone's experience in the future, and then passing it on to the clone in the past, it was even more unnecessary. If telling the clone's future experience in the past could change the future, it would mean that the future was not the real future. It would be meaningless to tell him, and he would still experience a completely unfamiliar future. If he could not change the future, wouldn't telling him only add to his worries? What would be the point? It was precisely because of this unsynchronized time that Luo Fan's doppelganger had already experienced millions of years, but Luo Fan's main body had only experienced tens of thousands of years. This was obviously because Luo Fan did not have too much patience to waste time comprehending the complicated chores of his doppelganger, and directly skipped a lot of the time wasted on these chores. Luo Fan stood on the three-dimensional talisman, carefully savoring the wonderful feeling of being a Tao master. After a long time, he slowly recovered from the wonderful feeling. Looking down at the huge three-dimensional talisman under his feet, he could not help but frown. This three-dimensional talisman had 12,960 layers, and in the past, it was already profound and profound. It contained boundless truths and possessed boundless might. However, after he became a Tao master and understood many mysteries of the aura and rune structure, this three-dimensional talisman seemed so crude. It was almost to the point that he could not bear to look at it. It's a complete waste of its real power. Luo Fan looked at the three-dimensional talisman, shook his head, and sighed. A thought flashed through his mind, and he took a step forward. He had already arrived outside the three-dimensional talisman, and was directly suspended in the middle of the boundless gray existence. In the past, this grayish existence could still have a great impact on him, and he needed to borrow the power of the three-dimensional talisman to completely isolate this influence. But at this moment, this boundless gray existence was like an ordinary gray fog to him. It could not affect him at all. He floated there. No matter how the grayish existences encircled him, it was as if those grayish existences did not exist. He appeared to be so calm and composed. Standing here, Luo Fan raised his hand towards the huge three-dimensional talisman. He pointed at the 12,960 layers of the three-dimensional talisman. In an instant, the three-dimensional talisman shook, and endless strange brilliance rushed out from the three-dimensional talisman. These lights were the changes that occurred when the gray existence hit the three-dimensional talisman. It had always existed. The reason why it hadn't appeared before was only because Luo Fan had borrowed the magical effect of the three-dimensional talisman to completely absorb the light and pour it into the law realm. After it appeared at this time, the 12,960 layers of three-dimensional talisman like a star seemed to become a sun that illuminated all things. Even the boundless gray existence could not cover it, and it spread very far. Seeing this, Luo Fan's right hand, which was pointing at the three-dimensional talisman, shook slightly. In an instant, the three-dimensional talisman completely collapsed, and the layers of three-dimensional talisman directly turned into countless silk threads. With a turn, they formed countless three-dimensional talisman, forming a cloud of mist, which still maintained the previous star-sized sphere shape. When this change occurred, The endless brilliance that was emitted from the sphere disappeared in an instant. If it were not for the protection of Luo Fan's power, the three-dimensional talisman would have been completely washed away and engulfed by the gray existence in the surroundings. The sphere formed by the three-dimensional talisman could have such incredible power that it could withstand the impact of the gray existence, and even turn the impact force into endless light. This was not because the three-dimensional talisman was made of high-grade materials, but because of the mysterious structure of the three-dimensional talisman. Without this structure, the three-dimensional talisman itself would be completely engulfed, assimilated, and eventually disappeared without a trace when it fell into the gap between heaven and earth and chaos. How could he have any ability to resist? At this moment, the three-dimensional talisman had completely dispersed from its original structure. Having lost its structure, it naturally could not resist the erosion and assimilation of the gray existence. I must complete this within 10 breaths, or the law realm will suffer irreparable damage. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The original purpose of the three-dimensional talisman sphere was to protect the law realm from being eroded and assimilated by the gray existence in the gap. At this moment, the overall structure of the three-dimensional talisman collapsed, and the law realm lost its protection. Luo Fan could only rely on his own power to protect the entire law realm from being eroded. However, even though Luo Fan was now a Tao master, and the power of his divine sense was even more terrifying than that of a peak sage to be, there was still a limit to it. It was naturally not a problem for him to protect himself, and he did not even need to use any means. He could naturally make his body not be affected by the gray existence in the surroundings. However, it was still a little too much for him to protect such a large law realm, and even more so to protect the enormous three-dimensional talisman that was the size of a star. 10 breaths of time was the limit of what he could do. If more than 10 breaths of time passed, his power would no longer be able to perfectly protect all of this. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only allow the law realm to be corroded by the dusky existence. Eventually, it would be completely destroyed and assimilated into the dusky existence around it. Everything within the law realm, including all living beings, all matter, and all power, would not be able to escape. Faced with such a situation, Luo Fan did not look anxious at all. His expression and actions were still calm. He gently waved his hands, and in accordance with his thoughts and his will, he began to control the endless three-dimensional talisman. Under his control, the countless three-dimensional talisman began to reassemble according to an extremely complicated and abstruse pattern. These three-dimensional talisman directly formed 99 spherical talisman layers, which looked like 99 round eggshells. Among them, the structure of each three-dimensional talisman layer was based on the strongest structure that he had comprehended. The 99 spherical talisman layers were equivalent to 99 of the strongest three-dimensional talisman layer structures that he had comprehended. After the 99 three-dimensional talisman layers were formed, rays of wisdom suddenly flashed in Luo Fan's mind, and countless inspirations suddenly emerged from the depths of his heart. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly saw the light, and suddenly understood the answer to the question that he had been unable to understand in the past. He could not help but laugh out loud. So that's how it is. As he laughed, he no longer hesitated, and raised his hand to quickly sketch in the void. Looking at the way he sketched, it seemed like he was sketching words one after another. Chapter 1037. After all the three-dimensional talismans were overlapped, Luo Fan still did not stop sketching. As he continued to sketch, layers of three-dimensional talisman shadows began to rise on the surface of the spherical three-dimensional talisman. Then, they suddenly shrank and entered the spherical three-dimensional talisman. It looked like layers of spherical three-dimensional talisman layers were constantly merging into the three-dimensional talisman sphere out of thin air. At this moment, more than 10 breaths had passed. However, whether it was the law realm or the three-dimensional talisman, they were not damaged because of more than 10 breath. On the contrary, a faint light began to radiate from the surface of the three-dimensional talisman sphere. Although the light was not as strong as the light at the beginning, it was still endless. This meant that the three-dimensional talisman had enough power to completely isolate the gray existence in the surroundings, so that the gray existence could no longer corrode the three-dimensional talisman, let alone the law realm that was enveloped by the three-dimensional talisman. Luo Fan continued to sketch in the void. After every few movements, the three-dimensional talisman shadow flashed on the three-dimensional talisman sphere. Every time the three-dimensional talisman shadow flashed, the light emitted by the three-dimensional talisman became a little more intense. Luo Fan sketched for a full 10 days and 10 nights before he stopped. When he stopped, the light emitted by the three-dimensional talisman ball was tens of thousands of times more intense than it had been before the change. Even the dusky existence in the surroundings was pierced through by this light. It directly changed the appearance of the grayish existence within an unknown radius, revealing all sorts of strange and magnificent sceneries. It's finally done. So this is the mystery of the aura rune structure. No wonder it has such power. It can actually make it easier for cultivators to comprehend the Tao. So it's because of this. Luo Fan sighed, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. What he had sketched in the void for the past 10 days and 10 nights were not other things, but words. He had sketched in this gray area for 10 days and 10 nights, which was equivalent to writing an article for 10 days and 10 nights. With the power of Luo Fan's current magic power, 10 days and 10 nights were enough for him to write an article. He had written an article with hundreds of millions of words. This article was none other than an article about the Tao Master Realm. It was his own understanding of the Tao Master Realm, all kinds of feelings, and all kinds of descriptions of how to achieve the Tao Master Realm. Its nature was actually the same as the text describing the way of the sage that he had obtained from the rune structure of the aura. The only difference was, the article that described the way of the saints was written by the saint. It was enough to completely contain all the mysteries of the way of the saints in the article. It could make the article endless. The number of words that reached the limit of what could be described by numbers was only 1 in a trillion. However, the article written by Luo Fan only talked about the mystery of the Tao Master Realm, which was to say, the mystery of Tao Master. Although it was difficult to describe this mystery with words, Luo Fan's own understanding could be clearly described with words. Therefore, such an article describing the mystery of Tao Master. In other words, there was a limit to the number of words. Therefore, because of this, Luo Fan was able to spend 10 days and 10 nights to completely write that article. At this moment, the number of words in this article was hundreds of millions. The mystery of the Tao Master Realm described in such an article was insignificant compared to a real Tao Master. However, this was already the limit of what Luo Fan could do. At least for him at this time, it was the limit of what he could do. After all, at this time, Luo Fan had just stepped into the Tao Master Realm and become a Tao Master. In such a realm, ordinary practitioners would only know how it was, but not why it was. It was extremely rare for Luo Fan to spend hundreds of millions of words to describe a general outline of it. The fundamental reason why the three-dimensional talisman sphere had such a change was that Luo Fan directly used the method of the aura rune structure to outline the article in a gray haze and directly integrated it into the spherical three-dimensional talisman. He directly combined the 99 three-dimensional talisman layers into words in different order and completely integrated the article into it. He used the different order to carry the article. This was because he did not imitate them. Instead, he used his own understanding to understand the mysteries within and then changed to a more suitable method for three-dimensional talismans. The structure of this three-dimensional talisman layer was different from the structure of the aura talisman. Among them, each three-dimensional talisman layer did not form a three-dimensional talisman void, but an existence like an eggshell. As one layer of the 3D talisman went deeper, another layer of 3D talisman went deeper, and another layer of 3D talisman went deeper, and another layer of 3D talisman went deeper. In this way, the 99 layers of 3D talisman went deeper, until the hundreds of millions of characters were completely used up. And the number of three-dimensional talisman needed for each word was different. Some needed more than 90, some needed 60 or 70, some only needed 20 or 30, and some even only needed 3 or 4 or 5. Therefore, although there were hundreds of millions of words, the final three-dimensional talisman layer did not exceed the number of billions. From a distance, it looked like billions of layers of eggshells, arranged layer by layer, compressed into a thin layer, like a film, directly wrapping the law realm. Using the three-dimensional talisman layer to carry the article was not simply carrying it. Luo Fan would not be so bored. The reason why he used the three-dimensional talisman to carry the article, or rather, to integrate the article into the arrangement of the three-dimensional talisman, was because the moment when Luo Fan was about to construct the three-dimensional talisman sphere, a thought flashed across his mind like lightning. It made him instantly understand why the structure of the aura rune was so mysterious, and why it had such an incredible effect. The fundamental reason was not anything else, nor was it any special structure. It was not because of any talisman, but because of the article about the path of the sage. This article about the path of the sage was so well hidden. It was obviously not for some cultivators to read or listen to. If Luo Fan did not coincidentally use a method that other cultivators could not use to analyze such an article, how could he have analyzed it? How could he have obtained it? Since this was the case, such an article was not written for cultivators, nor was it written for living beings. Then what was the purpose of this article? Could it be that the sage was bored and wanted to entertain himself? From here, it could be deduced just by analyzing it. This article was written for existences that were neither cultivators nor living beings. In other words, such an article about the path of the sage was written for heaven and earth, for all things, for time and for space. It was even written for the state of chaos. Even heaven and earth, all things, space-time and chaos had no will. Who said that without will and spiritual consciousness, one could not read an article? Wasn't the transformation of heaven and earth the same as writing an article for heaven and earth to read, thereby changing heaven and earth? And when a cultivator opened a cave abode, wasn't the establishment of a Taoist field to use one's will as an article for heaven and earth to read, thereby changing heaven and earth? Although these methods were crude, in essence, there was not much difference from writing an article for heaven and earth, all things, space-time, and chaos to read. Therefore, it could be said that heaven and earth, the reason why all things, space-time, and chaos could not read an article was that the method of writing the article was wrong, but the method used was not clever enough. For example, the article that described the Tao of sages contained in the rune structure was obviously a brilliant and mysterious method that could allow the world, all living things, time, space, and even chaos to understand the article. Therefore, the carrier of the article would be endowed with all kinds of power and become unfathomable and mysterious. The fundamental reason why the aura rune structure was so mysterious, so unfathomable, and so incomprehensible to ordinary living beings was that the article about the path of the sage was sufficiently profound and unfathomable. As for the other things, such as the runes, the strength of the aura, and the specific structure of the rune layer, these were just minor details and insignificant. Since he knew all of this in an instant, Luo Fan naturally completely understood how to fully exert the magical effect of the three-dimensional talisman layer. Therefore, the article about the mystery of the Tao Master Realm, which he had outlined for 10 days and 10 nights, appeared. The article about the mystery of the Tao Master Realm was naturally many times inferior to the article about the path of the sage, and could not even be mentioned in the same breath. However, the Tao Master Realm was, after all, the highest realm below the sage, so it was needless to say that it was mysterious and mysterious. Once such an article was written, ordinary practitioners could even start from scratch step by step and finally cultivate to the Tao Master Realm by relying on such an article. If such an article was presented to heaven and earth, all things, space-time, and chaos to let them read and understand such an article, it could naturally make the carrier of this article have incredible magical effects and contain incredible power. This magical effect and power, even if it was far inferior to the structure of the Aura rune, was certainly countless times better than the original messy structure. It was precisely because of this that such a situation had occurred, causing the structure of the three-dimensional rune sphere to directly transform into such an inconceivable state. Its degree of sturdiness was even more than 10,000 times stronger than before, and there were even various indescribable powers added to it. Looking at the changes of the spherical three-dimensional talisman, Luo Fan nodded to himself. He took a step forward and entered the three-dimensional talisman, entering the law realm. There was not much change in the law realm compared to before. The profound sage-to-be and Wu Dao Zi's doppelganger, who had been subdued by Luo Fan, had also completely integrated into the cultivation world of the law realm. At this moment, there was no one on the mountain where the image of Luo Fan existed. It was because they had discovered in the process of using their divine avatars to walk through the law realm that it was impossible to use such a method to achieve true breakthroughs and progress. Unless they completely immersed themselves in it, they could only nurture their divine avatars to their current level at the very most. It was not beneficial to them at all. As for those who had originally settled down on the surface of the three-dimensional talisman, they had already learned how unrealistic it was to cultivate there after tens of thousands of years. They had also completely integrated into the law realm. At this moment, apart from Luo Fan, it was likely that they themselves would not be able to discover each other. Luo Fan floated in the void. He didn't need to use any sacred art to naturally conceal himself. He wasn't discovered by any living beings in this world. He stood there and looked down at the law realm. He sensed the various changes in the law realm and gained a deeper understanding of the law world. As a result, his law world view was slightly enriched. This method is indeed useful. Luo Fan sighed. He was quite satisfied. Although he had only slightly enriched the law world view, and if he had not paid special attention to it, he would not have discovered this enrichment. This was already enough for Luo Fan. It had only been tens of thousands of years, but it was already enough to change the law world view. As time passed, the prospects would be extremely promising. How could he not be satisfied? He had not come here to reap the rewards that the law realm had brought him. He had come here to change the sun, moon, and stars of the law realm. Back then, Luo Fan had used the method of constructing multi-layered three-dimensional talisman to construct the sun of the law realm. That method was already extremely exquisite back then, and it had brought countless benefits to the law realm. However, now that he had comprehended the mysteries of the rune structure, this structure seemed to be too lacking. Most importantly, it was only the sun. The other stars were not real. This was a fly in the ointment, and it made the law realm seem a little incomplete. Most importantly, it was only the sun. The other stars were not real. It was not perfect. However, this was what he wanted to make up for. It was too wasteful back then. Luo Fan looked at the sun hanging high in the sky and sighed inwardly. He raised his hand and pointed gently, and the entire sky instantly changed. The three-dimensional talisman that formed the sun instantly separated from the shadow of the sun, and the entire sky instantly turned from extremely real to somewhat illusory. It looked exactly the same as when he had not fused the three-dimensional talisman into the sun. It had also become a projection. The three-dimensional talisman that was separated from the sun was clearly visible to Luo Fan, but it did not exist in the eyes of the people in the law realm. Even outsiders like Wu Daozi's clone could not see the existence of the three-dimensional talisman. After all, Luo Fan was the creator of the law realm. He was the master of the law realm, so everything in the law realm was under his control. Even Wu Daozi's original body would be in a difficult situation if he were to come here with the bronze ruler. Thus, he would naturally be able to take whatever he wanted from the others. It would be extremely easy for him to hide certain things from the masses of the law realm. As Luo Fan raised his hand and drew a few strokes, the three-dimensional talisman sphere suddenly collapsed and turned into countless three-dimensional talismans. These three-dimensional talismans were directly divided into 3 parts, each with roughly the same amount of talismans. These 3 parts of the three-dimensional talismans were stacked together in a spherical shape. It was just that there was a huge difference from their previous spherical appearance. They looked like 3 spheres that were piled up by countless grains of sand. Luo Fan looked at the 3 three-dimensional talisman spheres and smiled. He raised his hand and gently waved it in the air. In an instant, the 3 piles of three-dimensional talisman spheres instantly separated. 2 of the piles turned into 99 spherical talisman layers. The last pile turned into 99 flat three-dimensional talisman layers. The 2 piles of 99 three-dimensional talisman layers were all spherical empty shells. Each of them was about the size of the sun from before, and when they were spread out, it was extremely majestic. The 99 three-dimensional talisman layers were all extremely huge, and each of them was no smaller than the three-dimensional talisman spheres when spread out. Faced with this scene, Luo Fan raised his hand and continuously drew in the air. As he drew, a pile of 99 three-dimensional talisman layers began to overlap in a strange order and finally turned into a huge three-dimensional talisman sphere. Then, Luo Fan didn't stop, nor did he change the target of his operation. Instead, he continued to sketch in the void, writing one strange text after another. As he wrote the words in the air, the layers of shadows on the overlapping three-dimensional talisman sphere suddenly expanded and shrank. It looked as if there were new layers of spherical three-dimensional talismans integrated into the three-dimensional talisman sphere. In the process of this change, the three-dimensional talisman sphere gradually began to radiate light, and the essence of the sun and the charm of the true fire of the sun were continuously emitted from it. What Luo Fan was doing now was the same as what he had done outside just now. He was also writing an article for heaven and earth, all living things, space-time, and chaos. However, this article was not about the mysteries of the venerable realm, nor was it about the mysteries of the transcendent realm or the Tao integration realm. Instead, it was about the mysteries of the sun. What was the sun? What was the sunlight? What was the structure of the sun? What were the profound principles behind the structure? What were the special mysteries behind the structure? How did the world view explain the sun? Why did the sun have so many characteristics? Why did it have such endless vitality? Why could it bring so many benefits to all living things? And so on and so forth. An endless stream of words continuously appeared in his hands. In the end, they were arranged in a three-dimensional layer of talismans and continuously integrated into the three-dimensional talisman sphere that appeared in the void. Chapter 1038. This time, the number of words that Luo Fan drew in the void was far less than what he had drawn in the outside world. In just over 2 hours, he had already completed the process of drawing. The number of words he had drawn was naturally far from hundreds of millions. It was only a few million words. These words contained his comprehension of the sun, his understanding of the sun, and his understanding of the mysteries of the sun in the law world view. When these words fused with the three-dimensional talisman, the spherical three-dimensional talisman turned into a living sun. It hung high in the sky like a real sun, emitting endless light and heat that illuminated the entire world of the law realm. Fortunately, this was the law realm, so although the sun was emitting endless light and heat, it was still completely hidden by Luo Fan. It was still not seen by any living being, nor could it be sensed by any living being. It really works. Looking at the three-dimensional talisman in the sky that looked like the sun, Luo Fan could not help but reveal a manly smile on his face. After the text that described the mysteries of the sun was attached to the three-dimensional talisman, everything in the world, including the chaos of time and space, naturally responded to it. The various characteristics that were described were added to it, making the three-dimensional talisman really become like the sun that was described, possessing all the characteristics and mysteries of the sun. Such a mysterious method was obviously not limited to this place. It instantly gave Luo Fan a burst of inspiration, and countless special methods began to be born in an endless stream. After thinking for a while, Luo Fan had an idea. He raised his hand and pointed at the other 99 spherical three-dimensional talismans in the void. The 99 three-dimensional talismans began to overlap in an extremely complicated order. Finally, they overlapped into a three-dimensional talisman. Then, he began to draw strange characters in the void. This time, the words he drew were not describing the mysteries of the sun. The words he drew this time were describing the mysteries of the moon. It was describing everything that he had comprehended and understood about the moon in the law world view. After these words appeared, the three-dimensional spherical talisman on the three-dimensional talisman began to shine continuously. Outside the three-dimensional talisman sphere, faint lunar essence began to spread. The entire three-dimensional talisman. Gradually, it gave off the feeling of a moon. It looked more and more like a moon. This process of drawing words in the air lasted for another 2 hours. 2 hours later, the words that Luo Fan had drawn in the void appeared. However, there were already millions of them. It was a three-dimensional seal. It had completely transformed into a real moon, and when placed together with the three-dimensional talisman from before, it was like a sun and a moon were placed together. Seeing this, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He raised his hand and pointed at the two three-dimensional talisman spheres. The two spheres instantly shook, and one of them fused with the sun. Then, along with the shadow of the sun in the sky, it began to integrate into the star circulation system of this world. As for the other, it had fused with the invisible moon beneath the ground and was also incorporated into the star system of the law realm. When this happened, the entire law realm shook slightly. In an instant, an inexplicable change occurred. It seemed like the entire law realm had become more stable, and the circulation of the laws within it had become smoother. Some of the obstacles that had existed in the past had disappeared in an instant. Many cultivators in the law realm sensed the inexplicable change in the world at the same time. They sensed that the difficulty of comprehending the Tao and cultivating seemed to have decreased significantly. In an instant, many cultivators even broke through their bottleneck. The entire law realm was suddenly filled with an inexplicable aura. The appearance of this aura made Luo Fan smile instantly. This aura was one that he had been looking forward to immensely. It meant that this law realm could no longer accommodate peak connate grand Luo existences like before. Now, it could accommodate existences that had just become quasi-saints. In other words, from now on, peak connate grand Luo was no longer the limit of cultivation in this law realm. Peak connate grand Luo was now the new limit of the law realm. Although this was only a slight increase in the realm limit, its significance to the law realm was already completely different. That was because this meant that the law realm was taking another step forward on the path to surpassing the vast thousand worlds and becoming a perfect world. The vast thousand worlds could only accommodate connate grand Luo cultivators. On the other hand, a perfect world could accommodate the cultivation of sages. Although it couldn't accommodate them limitlessly, it could still accommodate them and appear. When a vast thousand worlds could begin to give birth to cultivators that surpassed connate grand luo cultivators, it meant that the vast thousand worlds had begun to surpass its own limits and had begun to move towards a higher level of heaven and earth. In other words, it had taken a small step towards becoming a perfect world. If a world created according to the law worldview could surpass the vast thousand worlds and advance towards a perfect world, it meant that the law worldview was truly moving towards a world that could support Luo Fan's ascension to sage. This meant that his chances of becoming a sage had increased. How could Luo Fan not be excited about this? How could he not be happy? Luo Fan smiled faintly as he carefully sensed the various changes in the law worldview. The law worldview in his mind and consciousness began to change slightly. This change allowed the law worldview to become more and more complete, allowing it to delve deeper into the essence of heaven and earth and the essence of chaos. After a while, Luo Fan finally stopped this process. He raised his hand and pointed at the void. In an instant, the 99 layers of three-dimensional talismans that seemed to be flat began to overlap layer by layer, according to some complicated pattern. The 99 flat layers of three-dimensional runes directly became one layer. When this change occurred, he didn't stop at all. He raised his hand and continuously sketched in the void, drawing out strange characters one after another. As these characters were sketched out, the flat layer of three-dimensional runes began to flicker, expand, shrink. This time, the characters that Luo Fan sketched out did not describe anything else but a sky full of stars. The mysteries of the entire starry sky. These were the mysteries of the starry sky that he had personally comprehended and understood. The mysteries of the starry sky explained by the law worldview. The sky full of stars was vast and boundless. It was very mysterious, although any of the stars was much weaker than the sun and the moon. However, the starry sky formed by the stars in the sky contained more mysteries than the sun alone. The moon alone was many times more mysterious. This time, the process of Luo Fan sketching out the characters did not last for 2 hours or even 10 days and 10 nights. Instead, it lasted for more than half a year before he stopped. In this half a year, the number of characters that Luo Fan had sketched out was hundreds of billions. This number of characters was hundreds of times more than the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm that he had sketched out previously. Such a number of characters, of course, did not mean that the mysteries of the starry sky were more profound and mysterious than the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm. It only meant that the mysteries of the starry sky were hundreds of times more complicated than the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm. It should be known that the number of stars in the sky was almost endless. Under such circumstances, the mysteries contained in the starry sky were only hundreds of times more complicated than the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm. Such a gap showed how profound the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm were. Among the hundreds of billions of characters that Luo Fan sketched out, almost all the characteristics of the stars in the starry sky were described. The stars he described were not described according to the infinite stars and galaxies in the Earth's universe. Instead, they were described according to his understanding of the characteristics of the many stars that a normal world with an orbicular sky and a rectangular Earth must have. The number of worlds that Luo Fan had opened up had reached a level that ordinary people could not imagine. Under such circumstances, he naturally had a deep understanding of what a starry sky that could perfectly support the stable and eternal existence of a normal world should look like. How many stars were there? What kind of characteristics did each star have? What kind of mysteries did each star have? What kind of relationship did they have with each other? All these kinds of questions were in his mind, and there was not the slightest bit of ambiguity in them. It was precisely because of this that he was able to do something that was almost heaven-defying. In half a year, with the help of hundreds of billions of characters, he had described the mysteries of the entire starry sky clearly and clearly, without leaving anything out. As Luo Fan sketched for half a year, the three-dimensional layer of the talisman started to expand continuously. Its surface also started to turn pitch black, and bright stars started to appear within it one by one, decorating the increasingly vast void. More and more dense star essence was continuously emitted from the three-dimensional layer of the talisman, gradually filling the entire world of the Law Realm. Therefore, although Luo Fan had completely concealed the existence of the three-dimensional talisman during this half a year, the living beings in the Law Realm could not see the strange starry sky taking shape. However, they could still sense that the Law Realm was constantly changing, and the density of the star essence was slowly increasing. Moreover, the originally somewhat illusory star essence was becoming more and more real during this process. In fact, more and more cultivation methods related to the stars were being created. After half a year, Luo Fan sketched out the last character and fused it with the three-dimensional layer of the talisman. In an instant, the three-dimensional layer of the talisman suddenly expanded infinitely. The billions of stars and the boundless void started to gradually overlap with the starry sky of the Law Realm and fuse with it. Finally, after a few breaths, when all the changes calmed down, the flat layer of the three-dimensional layer of the talisman had turned into a boundless starry sky. The pitch-black void was dotted with stars that emitted dense star essence. Looking up from the ground, the clear and deep starry sky made people involuntarily feel a kind of reverence, feeling a kind of boundless vastness. When the starry sky returned to its original position, the entire Law Realm once again underwent an inexplicable change. The various aspects of the Law Realm received some sort of upgrade. However, this upgrade didn't result in any qualitative changes. It didn't allow the cultivators in the Law Realm to break through the early stage of the Quasi-Saint Realm. Instead, they remained at the peak of the early stage of the Quasi-Saint Realm. However, this change reduced the difficulty of cultivating in the Law Realm by a lot. The bottlenecks and shackles that cultivators had to face in their cultivation were reduced by a lot. Luo Fan wasn't disappointed when he saw this. He was already satisfied to be able to produce such a change in the Law Realm through this method. Whether or not the Law Realm could truly reach its peak in the future and allow him to become a sage would depend on his continuous cultivation. He could only pin his hopes on some minor techniques that he occasionally comprehended. That was simply unrealistic. With that thought in mind, he raised his hand and pressed it down. In an instant, the image that he had left in the Law Realm, as well as the existence of that image, the space-time maze around the mountain disappeared in an instant. From then on, the mountain would become a relatively good cultivation treasure land. However, it would no longer be the cultivation holy land it used to be. At this moment, the Law Realm had basically matured and the cultivation world within it was already self-sufficient. At this moment, the Law Realm had basically matured and the cultivation world within it could already be self-sufficient. Even if the civilization was destroyed in the future, the civilization that was born would naturally develop a cultivation civilization that conformed to the Law Realm's worldview due to the fundamental nature of the Law Realm. There would no longer be a need for him to leave behind an image to guide the cultivation world of the Law Realm. As such, there was no need for him to leave an image in the Law Realm. Moreover, leaving behind a cultivation holy land would be akin to pulling up seedlings to help them grow. Hence, it was better to just eliminate it directly. It was precisely because of this that he decided to do this. After doing all this, Luo Fan didn't disturb any of the living beings in the Law Realm. He lifted his foot and took a step forward, arriving outside the Law Realm. He arrived at the three-dimensional talisman that was emitting boundless brilliance and piercing through the endless gray mist. Looking at the boundless brilliance emitted by the three-dimensional talisman, Luo Fan casually pointed at it. The boundless brilliance instantly retracted and directly connected with the sun, moon, and stars within the three-dimensional talisman. It provided a huge amount of power to the three-dimensional talismans as a whole, making the three-dimensional talismans as a whole more stable. The entire three-dimensional talisman seemed to have become obscure, and no light could be seen from it anymore. It looked like an ordinary sphere, and it seemed so inconspicuous among the boundless grayness. After doing all of this, Luo Fan took a step forward and directly arrived on the surface of the 3D seal. He sat down on the 3D seal, and with a thought, all of his senses and thoughts connected to the avatar that was fighting against Wu Dao Zi, Master Ashen Wood, and Master Do Quangzi billions of years ago. It was the avatar that seemed to be fighting endlessly against Wu Dao Zi, Master Ashen Wood, and Master Do Quangzi. His main body and the clone were in two completely different time dimensions. Although more than half a year had passed for his main body, only a few days had passed for the clone. To be more precise, the clone that Luo Fan's main body was contacting at this time was a few days after he had obtained the comprehension of the Dao Master Realm from the clone. In other words, it happened to be when the clone was protected by the three-dimensional rune sphere, resisting the erosion of the surrounding matrix spacetime. When the connection was established, Luo Fan's main body instantly poured countless insights into the mind of the clone through this mysterious connection. I see. In an instant, Luo Fan's clone came to a sudden realization and a happy smile appeared on his face. The relationship between Luo Fan's main body and his clone had always been one of mutual promotion. The main body obtained the comprehension of the realm breakthrough from the clone, and the clone obtained the usage of the higher realm from the main body. The relationship between them had always been like this since a long time ago. At this moment there was no exception. After an unknown number of trillions of years, Luo Fan's original body obtained a breakthrough to the Dao Master Realm from this doppelganger through the strange characteristics of the gap between the heaven and earth and the state of chaos, and thus became a Dao Master. After that, according to the mysteries of the Dao Master Realm and the experiences of his doppelganger, Luo Fan's doppelganger gained a deeper understanding of the use of the multi-layered talisman. In turn, through the mysterious connection between his doppelganger and his doppelganger, Luo Fan's doppelganger gained the same understanding and the same means. At this time, Luo Fan's clone showed a faint expression on his face. He raised his hand and gently touched the three-dimensional talisman composed of gray existences around his body. In an instant, countless gray strange existences began to emerge on the three-dimensional talisman. Then, Luo Fan used the bright red jade-like big axe in his hand and began to continuously chop these strange gray existences. After a while, the gray existences turned into 99 spherical three-dimensional talisman layers. These 99 spherical three-dimensional talisman layers were not small. Each of them seemed to be about the same size as the three-dimensional talisman surrounding him. However, 99 three-dimensional talisman layers appeared around him at this time, appearing inside the spherical three-dimensional talisman. It did not seem to be crowded at all. The mystery and strangeness was unimaginable. Seeing the 99 three-dimensional talisman balls appear, Luo Fan continuously sketched them in the void. Strange characters appeared one after another as he sketched. The 99 three-dimensional talisman layers began to overlap in an inexplicable order as he sketched. The changes that had occurred 3 times in the later Dharma ending age appeared again at this time. Chapter 1039. As Luo Fan continued to outline the strange characters, the grayish three-dimensional talisman gradually changed its appearance, becoming more and more illusory and almost invisible. Finally, after an hour, when Luo Fan outlined the last character, the three-dimensional talisman had completely disappeared, as if it had never been there. Not only could it be seen with one's eyes, but it was also difficult to perceive its existence. After doing all this, Luo Fan let out a long breath. With a wave of his hand, the grayish three-dimensional talisman that had originally existed around him and completely isolated him from the matrix spacetime collapsed in an instant and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. The moment the three-dimensional talisman disappeared, the surrounding rectangular spacetime suddenly shook. It was like a reservoir that had lost its dam as it rushed toward Luo Fan crazily. Judging from its momentum, it seemed like it wanted to crush Luo Fan into powder. However, when the matrix spacetime came within a few inches of Luo Fan's body, it seemed to have encountered a completely unshakable dam. No matter how it rushed and hit, it could not go any further. This allowed Luo Fan to hover in the matrix spacetime, surrounded by a thin barrier that was several inches thick, which isolated him from being eroded and harmed by the matrix spacetime. Compared to the previous situation where he was completely protected by the three-dimensional talisman, unable to move and could only protect himself, this method was already many times better. At this time, he had almost completely regained his freedom. For him, the surrounding matrix spacetime no longer had any protection. Standing there was no difference from standing there with nothing. He could still fight and harm the cultivators in the matrix spacetime. At this moment, Wu Daozi and Mad Do were both shocked and turned their eyes to where Luo Fan was. Impossible? How could he resist it? Wu Daozi was in disbelief. The magic treasure in his hand was a magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the sage-to-be level. The power of such a magic treasure was earth-shattering. It was not something that an ordinary peak quasi-sage could withstand. Moreover, at this moment, he had already unleashed the power of this magic treasure to the second realm. That power was many times stronger than the normal power of this magic treasure. As such, unless one had a magic treasure of the same level, and the magic treasure's power had also reached the second level, then one would be able to withstand it. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to withstand it, even pinnacle quasi-sages. For a magic treasure like this, it was only a matter of a single move. There was no way he could block it. Previously, the fact that Luo Fan was able to use the grayish existence to construct a three-dimensional talisman to resist the attack of this magic treasure had already surprised him. Countless thoughts appeared in his mind. At this moment, Luo Fan was actually able to block all the attacks from this magic treasure so easily. It seemed like none of the attacks from this magic treasure could get close to his body or shake his body. How could he understand this change? Naturally, he found it unbelievable and unimaginable. At this moment, Luo Fan was very comfortable. He floated in the rectangular spacetime and stretched out his hand to grab a square in the spacetime. He carefully sensed the countless mysterious information coming from the square, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. Sure enough, the power has increased greatly. I should have thought of this. I didn't expect that I would need my body to remind me. I'm really ashamed. Such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. The words he had just outlined formed an article. It was not an article about the sun, moon, stars, or the realm of Tao Master, but an article about absolute defense. He had included all the attack and defense methods he knew, including all his divine senses, all the damage he could cause, including the light emitted by the branch in Ashen Musi's hand, the rectangular spacetime, and the attack of the bronze ruler. All the damage he knew were included in it. After the grayish three-dimensional talisman received the words written by Luo Fan, it naturally had some mysterious connection with heaven and earth, all things, time, space, and even the state of chaos. Naturally, it was attached with all kinds of incredible power. Although the defensive power was not as strong as described in the article by Luo Fan, it was still extremely amazing. At least it could exert the power of the grayish existence to a great extent, thus completely isolating him from the erosion of the surrounding spacetime. It was directly invisible, making him move freely in the rectangular spacetime as if nothing had happened. Fighting Spirit Do looked at Luo Fan, his eyes flashing with an increasingly strong fighting intent. I didn't expect that the way you cultivate is actually similar to my way of fighting. I didn't expect that you could make such great progress in a fight. It seems that I really came to the right place this time. Madman Do said. His imposing aura was getting stronger and stronger. This imposing aura directly targeted Luo Fan and fiercely pressed down on him. It seemed as if Luo Fan would be directly crushed into powder. Facing such a chi power, Luo Fan did not care at all. The damage caused by the chi power was the most common. Naturally, he had already considered it before and had added the damage caused by this chi power within the protection range of the three-dimensional talisman. If the strength of this chi power could reach the level of a sage, or even be enough to destroy the world and open up the world in the chaos, then he would naturally not be able to resist it. However, no matter how strong fighting spirit Do was, he was only at the pinnacle of a quasi-sage. Luo Fan's protection could even completely resist the power of the second layer of a magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of a quasi-sage. How could this chi power have any effect on the protection? At this moment, Luo Fan did not feel much under the pressure of this chi power, nor was he hurt by it. Sensing the incomparably safe protection around him, Luo Fan smiled and pointed at the three-dimensional talisman where Ashen Musi was. In an instant, the three-dimensional talisman collapsed with a loud bang and turned into 99 spherical talisman layers in the void, which suddenly overlapped with each other. Then, they suddenly overlapped and wrapped around the boundless multicolored light that had just appeared. Then, the 99 overlapping three-dimensional rune spheres began to flicker constantly. One after another, the three-dimensional talisman shadows expanded and contracted again. It was as if an endless number of three-dimensional talismans had appeared out of thin air and started to merge with the three-dimensional talisman spheres. The method Luo Fan used was, of course, exactly the same as the method he used to construct his defense. However, he did not use his hands to draw words out of thin air like before. Instead, he directly drew the words in his mind. Then, the words that were drawn in his mind were constantly integrated into the three-dimensional rune sphere through the changing order of the three-dimensional rune layer. In such a way, his speed was much faster than before. However, it consumed even more mental and physical effort. With the appearance of this change, the three-dimensional talisman gradually became transparent. Even its entire form gradually became illusory. It was the color of the multicolored light that was wrapped by the three-dimensional talisman. It began to leak out from within. Everyone could clearly see that within the multicolored light. Master Ashen Mu opened his eyes and looked around in confusion. However, at that moment the ruler spacetime suddenly began to collide with the light. He and the multicolored light began to fight, as if they were mortal enemies. The matrix spacetime itself was the second attack of the bronze ruler in Wu Dao Zi's hand. The multicolored light around Master Ashen Mu was also the second attack of a magic treasure of the same level. The two were of the same level, so neither could suppress the other. The confrontation between the multicolored light and the matrix spacetime became more and more intense. At the place where the two clashed, countless small worlds were born and destroyed. The multicolored light was occasionally compressed by the ruler spacetime, but it would immediately counterattack in another direction, forcing the matrix spacetime to retreat. However, no matter how much it shrank and retreated, the ruler spacetime could press into the original location of the three-dimensional talisman, but the multicolored light could not press into that location. It was as if the three-dimensional talisman had become a one-way seal. The outside could enter, but the inside could not. Not good. Seeing this, Wu Daozi couldn't help but frown. He knew that Luo Fan was using his power to deal with Master Ashen Mu. After letting out a cry, he raised his hand and gently shook the bronze ruler. The huge human shadow above the bronze ruler turned the ruler in its hand. The ruler spacetime suddenly shrank and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. In the end, only the huge human shadow was left floating above the bronze ruler. The entire spacetime looked completely normal. In the past, once the ruler spacetime was used, it was almost invincible. No matter how strong the opponent was, As long as they didn't have a treasure of the same level, they wouldn't be able to resist it. Once it was used, it would be able to take over the opponent. This was also the reason why Wu Daozi was so confident in the ruler spacetime. However, at this time, the people he was facing either had magic treasures of the same level or special spells. Even the weakest Luo fan had a strange defense that could protect himself and resist the erosion of the ruler spacetime. Under such circumstances, the ruler spacetime was useless. Not only could it not deal with the opponent, but it would also be used by the opponent to deal with their own companions. Since that was the case, there was no need to use the ruler spacetime. Not only would it be a waste of his own power, but it would also be used by the opponent to increase his chances of failure. It was because of this consideration that Wu Daozi put away the ruler spacetime at this time. At this time, Luo Fan was still constantly sketching strange words in his mind. He was writing a mysterious article that was constantly integrated into the three-dimensional talisman that wrapped around Song Musi, making the three-dimensional talisman more and more invisible, and its power became more and more powerful. Although the ruler spacetime was no longer used by him and no longer helped him to attack the light released by the magic treasure in Song Musi's hand, Song Musi didn't feel much better. At this moment, he suddenly felt that he was constantly being attacked by an invisible existence. This invisible existence was extremely terrifying. Every attack seemed to hit the insignificant weakness of the light around him. Every attack was enough to shake the foundation of the existence of the light. Every attack was transmitted through the light to his body, making him feel that his whole body was constantly shaking with the attack. Every small injury was constantly accumulating in his body. It seemed that it was about to accumulate to the point where it couldn't be suppressed and completely burst out. Could it be that this person is really like a fighting madman? The more he fights, the more powerful he becomes? He didn't have such a method before, how could he have such an amazing method now? Song Musi thought while trying to resist the invisible attacks around him. At this moment, although he could see the outside world through the light, his perception couldn't perceive the outside world at all. In his perception, he still seemed to exist in the boundless gray. There was no change at all from the previous form of existence. The article that Luo Fan had added to the three-dimensional talisman. It was none other than an article that described the mystery of the light and described how to deal with it. Luo Fan had already seen this multicolored light twice in the past few days. In the past few days, the light was constantly fighting with the three-dimensional talisman he had constructed. He didn't know how many times they had clashed with each other. However, he had already gradually understood the various properties of the light. This also gave him some insight into the mystery of the light and how to deal with it. He was able to turn it into an article he had written for all living things in the world, for the chaos of time and space to see, for them to give his 3D talisman the ability to deal with these mysteries and attacks. That way, the 3D talisman could easily deal with the multicolored light and make Master Ashen would feel so uncomfortable and uncomfortable. Fortunately, I thought of how to use that existence to construct a three-dimensional talisman. Otherwise, even if I added these words, I'm afraid it wouldn't have much effect. Luo Fan thought at this moment. Although the text attached to the three-dimensional talisman was an important reason why the three-dimensional talisman could display such power, the most fundamental reason was the material that made up the three-dimensional talisman. It was precisely because the material that made up the three-dimensional talisman was the grayish existence that came from the gap between heaven and earth and the chaotic space. This allowed the three-dimensional talisman to have an effect on the power displayed by Song Musi's magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the quasi-sage level. If he didn't use that grayish existence, and instead used the magic power in Luo Fan's body to construct the three-dimensional talisman, the effect would definitely be greatly reduced. Not to mention turning the three-dimensional talisman into a sharp weapon to deal with the light, it might even be directly broken and turned into nothingness the moment it collided with the light. The article attached to the three-dimensional talisman for all living things in this world and the chaotic space to see was, after all, only a mystery. The thing that really displayed these mysteries was the three-dimensional talisman itself. If the material was insufficient, it would be like using tofu to make a robot. No matter how perfect one's design was, no matter how detailed each part was, or even if one designed a real artificial intelligence, once it was moved, it would definitely fall apart and not be able to take shape. The speed of using one's mind to draw the words was much faster than using one's bare hands. Originally, it would have taken Luo Fan more than an hour to draw the words, but at this moment, it only took him a few dozen breaths to completely draw all the words and imprint them on the three-dimensional talisman. The three-dimensional talisman became invisible and enveloped Songmusi like an invisible chi shield. The light around Songmusi took on the shape of a ball and was unable to break through the obstruction of the chi shield. Instead, it was constantly suppressed by the chi shield, causing countless strange shapes to appear. It looked like a balloon that could explode at any time. Songmusi frowned and felt that things had really become troublesome. Previously, when he sensed the grayish existence around him, he was able to comprehend the grayish existence. In the end, after countless billions of years, he completely comprehended the mysteries of the grayish existence and broke free. Although this took an extremely long time, it was extremely shocking. After all, there was still hope. It was not enough to make him despair. There was a way out, so he was not very anxious. However, at this moment, he could not see the grayish existence around him at all, let alone comprehend the mysteries within it. How could he still use the previous method to escape? This was simply his last path of retreat, and it had completely wiped out the last bit of hope that existed within him. This matter was naturally much more troublesome than before, so how could he not be moved? Songmusi frowned, and the branch in his hand scattered even more light. It constantly condensed into various strange shapes within the chi shield and frantically collided with it. However, the result was very disappointing. The energy barrier wasn't affected at all. No matter how the multicolored light collided, the three-dimensional talisman didn't move at all. It even attacked another location according to the imbalance caused by the multicolored light, causing the multicolored light to become even larger. During this entire process, Luo Fan did not exert any control at all. It was completely the three-dimensional talisman's reaction. Just this reaction was enough for Songmusi to struggle with. This was enough to show how mysterious the three-dimensional talisman was, and it was enough to show how much progress Luo Fan had made after obtaining the comprehension of his main body. Chapter 1040. There were 7 great saints on earth. They were the primeval Lord of Heaven, the Taishang Ancestor, the Tongtian Ancestor, the Primordial Ancestor, the Monster Ancestor, the Amitabha Buddha, and the Ancestor of the human race, Empress Hua. They were teachers and friends, but at the same time, they were also competitors. Ashen Muzi was the disciple of the Taishang Ancestor, while Wu Daozi was the disciple of the Monster Ancestor. No one knew whose disciple Madman Do was, but he had to be the disciple of a saint. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared treat Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi this way. Millions of years ago, Shen Dao had met a woman called Yu Shensi. She claimed to be Empress Hua's maid, but her true identity was Empress Hua's disciple. In the tens of millions of years since Luo Fan had come to this universe before it shattered and became Earth, he'd seen as many as 4 disciples of a saint. In the eyes of the other living beings in the world, this kind of opportunity was already a great opportunity, a great blessing. Songmusi was a disciple of the Taishang Taoist ancestor. The mystiques bestowed upon him by the Taishang Taoist ancestor were so powerful that they reached an unimaginable level. Coupled with his own cultivation level, he was at the peak of the quasi-sage realm. The magic treasure in his hand was a powerful magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle quasi-sage level. If he had unleashed all of his magical abilities and displayed his strongest attack during the battle with Luo Fan, even if he couldn't have subdued Luo Fan in an instant, he certainly wouldn't have been in such a difficult situation at this time. This was evident from Wu Daozi. His combat arts weren't as strong as Ashen Muse's, but the latter was completely sealed. Wu Daozi, on the other hand, was facing off against Luo Fan outside. The difference between the two was huge. It was obvious. Luo Fan stood there, a calm expression on his face, his heart filled with an indescribable joy. His current performance meant that he was strong enough to subdue the disciple of a peak demi-sage saint. This meant that his combat arts had reached the peak of this world, second only to saint. How could he not feel happy about such a fact? Wonderful. You've gained an absolute advantage now. That way, I won't have to help you anymore. A voice filled with indescribable excitement and fighting spirit entered Luo Fan's ears. It woke him up from that inexplicable joy. As soon as he heard this voice, he knew exactly where it came from. This voice was clearly from Mad Do. Turning his head, he saw that Do Guangzi and Wu Daozi were already standing together. There was no longer any confrontation between them, and the two of them were looking at Luo Fan. Among them, Madman Do's eyes were burning with the flames of war. Wu Daozi's eyes were burning with rage. No wonder you didn't make a move just now. So it was because of this. Luo Fan sighed. He finally understood why Madman Do didn't seize the opportunity when he was transforming the 3D talisman to completely seal Master Ashen Muse to deal with him. It turned out that Madman Do had deliberately allowed Luo Fan to completely subdue Master Ashen Muse so that Luo Fan could completely win the battle, so that Madman Do could deal with Luo Fan without violating his principles. At this moment, Madman Do didn't allow Luo Fan to continue thinking. His body shook, and the long staff in his hand trembled slightly. In an instant, it tore through the void and directly blasted towards Luo Fan's head. That speed, that momentum. It was almost as if it wanted to completely destroy the world. As the long staff approached, Luo Fan felt as if the entire world was wrapped in it. All of its power was added to the long staff and poured towards him, as if it wanted to completely destroy him. Facing such a long staff, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed. Countless complex and mysterious 3D talismans suddenly flashed on the bright red axe in his hand. These 3D talismans were directly in the shape of the bright red axe, layer by layer, as if countless bright red axes were constantly merging into it. In the blink of an eye, the entire bright red axe had completely changed. At first glance, it seemed to be a bright red axe. However, if one observed it carefully, they would find that it was not a bright red axe at all. It was clearly the product of countless worlds, countless universes, and countless space-time fusing together. The whole bright red axe shook slightly, and countless worlds and countless space-time were shaking. The bright red axe was facing him, and it was as if countless worlds and countless space-time were crushing him. Such a feeling, such a change, was completely different from before. Its power had increased by more than 1,000 times. The change of this bright red axe was the method that Luo Fan had just comprehended. He had integrated the article written about the chaos of time and space into it, so that the heaven and earth, all living things, space-time, and chaos could add their power to it, thus giving the bright red axe a power that it didn't have before. The article that Luo Fan had integrated into the bright red axe was none other than the article that described the mysteries of the time's trend. This article contained the mysteries of the reincarnation of thousands of eras that he had seen on the road of transcendence, the mysteries of the trend of the times that he had seen in the sage's imprint, and the principles of the trend of the times that he had seen through his body in the untainted land, his body in the Earth universe, and his doppelgangers in the Tianyuan Great World after comparing each other. All of this was completely integrated into an article of hundreds of thousands of words, which was integrated into the giant axe. As a result, The giant axe took on such an incredible form and possessed power that was many times stronger than before. After the giant axe took shape, Luo Fan gently lifted it. In an instant, the giant axe directly traversed time and space, arriving in front of Crazy Dough's head even though it was launched later. However, he didn't seem to care about the long rod that was heading towards his head. However, this wasn't because he wanted to perish together with Crazy Dough, but because he had absolute confidence that when he chopped off Crazy Dough's head, Crazy Dough's long rod definitely wouldn't be able to touch his head. The mystique that Crazy Dough had used was a battle mystique that had been passed down by the sage. This mystique had endless power. The higher one's fighting spirit was, the more powerful it would be. At that moment, Luo Fan's power had ignited an unprecedented fighting spirit. The power of this mystique had naturally reached an unprecedented level. However, under such circumstances, just as his long rod was about to hit his opponent's head, his opponent's large axe actually arrived first even though it had been launched later. This change was truly out of his expectations, and he almost couldn't react in time. However, he had rich combat experience after all. His mystique was boundless. At this critical moment, the long rod in his hand slightly shook and turned, bypassing a mysterious trajectory. It was as if his original goal was what he wanted to do, directly blocking the long rod between his head and the bright red giant axe, allowing the giant axe to directly hit the long rod. In an instant, an unimaginable power was transmitted directly from the bright red giant axe, making Crazy Dough feel as if his long rod was supporting countless worlds. Originally, it wouldn't even waver in the face of a magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level. It seemed as if it would never suffer any damage, but now it actually felt like it couldn't hold on. It was making cracking sounds, as if it could completely collapse at any time. At this moment, Crazy Dough felt that failure was so close to him for the first time. The fighting spirit in his eyes skyrocketed 1,000 times in an instant. This was what he wanted. Since he reached the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level hundreds of millions of years ago, he had completely forgotten what it felt like to be defeated. Because of this, his cultivation realm couldn't be improved for a long time. He couldn't really enjoy the joy of fighting, couldn't understand the true meaning of fighting, and couldn't understand the true meaning of fighting. He couldn't understand the true mystery of the great Tao. Because of this, he became the Crazy Dough that he was now. That was why he would desperately pursue fighting without caring about right or wrong. He even wanted to fight forever, until the end of time, until the end of the world, until the end of the world. He wanted to fight forever. What he wanted was to feel the taste of failure. How could it be called a fight if there was only victory and no defeat? Only with victory and defeat could one truly understand what fighting was, and only then could one feel the joy and sorrow, pain and joy of fighting. Only then could one truly understand the true meaning of fighting and understand the true mystery of fighting. Feeling this feeling of near failure, Crazy Dough's heart trembled. It wasn't fear, but excitement. His fighting spirit soared because of this excitement. Good! He let out a loud roar. Suddenly, a golden light burst forth from his body. Under this golden light, Mad Dough's figure seemed to have become taller. The long staff in his hand also seemed to have undergone some inexplicable changes. It seemed to have become more powerful, more solid, and more terrifying. An indescribable force suddenly erupted from the long staff and collided with the bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand. In an instant, the entire world seemed to be shaking along with it. This time, it wasn't just the living beings on the Qilin cliff, but all the living beings in the world heard the rumbling thunder in the sky. In an instant, countless cultivators cast their gazes toward the sky. Some powerful peak quasi-sages even cast their gazes in the direction of Qilin Cliff and saw the battle between Luo Fan and Dou Quangzi at that location. In a strange palace hidden in a mysterious place between the heavens and the earth, a woman was commanding many other women to clean up a vegetable field. Suddenly, the woman raised her eyebrows and looked into the void. Her eyes seemed to pierce through the endless barriers of time and space, and she saw a scene that was very far away, or perhaps it should be said that it was countless spacetimes away. I didn't expect such an interesting thing to happen there. It seems that I have another excuse to go out. The woman smiled and thought to herself. This woman was none other than Rain Shensi, whom Luo Fan had met once before. This palace was naturally Empress Nvoi's Taoist right site, Empress Nvoi's palace. After thinking about it, Rain Shensi ordered, "You guys carefully remove the weeds in this area. I have to go out for a while, so don't be lazy. If you're weak, I'll come back to check. Don't regret it." The women responded solemnly, not daring to be careless. Seeing this, Rain Shensi smiled and took a step forward. Her figure turned into a rainbow and directly rushed out of Empress Nvoi's palace, heading toward a certain place in the void. "You have your day too. Crazy doe, let's see how you die today." The moment she rushed out of Empress Nvoi's palace, a thought flashed across her mind. Along the way, a ray of Buddhist light also rushed out from somewhere in the void, advancing toward the same destination as her. "Hey, isn't that Senior Brother Divine Zen Master? Why are you free to leave the blissful Taoist right today?" Rain Shensi shouted when she saw the ray of Buddhist light. The ray of Buddhist light paused for a moment, then stopped in the void and turned into a monk in a gray-white frock. The monk was sitting cross-legged in the void, holding a golden lotus flower. She was holding a golden lotus as she bowed towards Rain Shensi and said, "So it's Junior Martial Sister Rain Shensi. Junior Sister, where are you going instead of cultivating in Empress Nvoi's palace?" Rain Shensi giggled and turned into Divine Zen Master. She bowed and said, "Today, Junior Brother Crazy Doe has a chance to make a breakthrough. How could I not lend him a hand?" The God Zen Master's appearance was ordinary. His skin was burnt yellow, but his eyes were extremely deep and clear, like two deep and pitch-black universes, able to reflect everything. He could see through everything. He smiled and said, "I see. I'm also going to help Junior Brother Do Kwangzi. Since Junior Sister has the same goal as me, why don't we go together?" As he spoke, a faint smile flickered in his eyes. The smile made Rain Shensi giggle and nod. "That's how it should be. Senior Brother, please." Divine Zen Master smiled and nodded. Nodding his head, he moved his body and turned into a ray of Buddhist light, charging toward a certain spot in the void. Rain Shensi also smiled and turned into a ray of light, following behind Divine Zen Master. Not long after, another strange ray of light flashed across the void. The light was faintly discernible and was extremely fast. "Is that Junior Sister Wu Weizi?" Rain Shensi was surprised when he saw the ray of light. He greeted, "So it's Senior Sister Rain Shensi. What a coincidence. Senior Sister, where are you going instead of cultivating in Empress Nvoi's palace?" A voice came from the ray of light. The voice was crisp and pleasant, making people feel refreshed as if they were bathing in a clear spring. When Rain Shensi and Divine Zen Master showed themselves, the ray of light paused and revealed a woman. The woman looked petite and delicate, but her eyes were murderous at the moment, as if she was going to deal with someone. "Greetings, Senior Brother Divine Zen Master." Wu Weizi was surprised when she saw Divine Zen Master and quickly bowed. "Junior Sister, you're too polite. Looking at you, it seems like you're going to help Junior Brother Do Kwangzi." Divine Zen Master smiled when he saw Wu Weizi's reaction. "That's right." Wu Weizi wore a smile that was close to clenching her teeth. "That's great. We're going to help Junior Brother Do Kwangzi too. Let's not waste any more time and go quickly. I'm afraid Junior Brother Do Kwangzi's chance of breaking through will disappear." Rain Shensi smiled when he heard this. "That's right." Wu Weizi's eyes were filled with anxiety. He nodded and excused himself before turning into a faintly discernible ray of light and continued on his way. Looks like junior brother Do Guangxi does have a wide circle of friends. Divine Zen Master shook his head and sighed when he saw Wu Weizi's anxious expression. His words seemed to be praising Crazy Z, but one could hear a hint of schadenfreude in his tone. Senior brother, gloating isn't something a Buddhist disciple would do. Rain Shensi couldn't help but chuckle when he saw Divine Zen Master's sanctimonious expression. I've sinned, I've sinned. Divine Zen Master placed his palms together and lowered his head. He then raised his head and said, however, we are doing this for the good of junior brother Do Guangxi. We aren't gloating. Senior brother, if you continue to waste time here, you'll really miss this rare opportunity. Rain Shensi smiled. Divine Zen Master smiled. He turned into a Buddhist light and began moving forward at a faster speed than before. Rain Shensi shook his head and turned into a rainbow that followed behind the Buddhist light. He was also moving forward at a faster speed than before. Though the world was vast and boundless, it wasn't too far for them who were at the peak of the quasi-sage level. Very quickly, the two of them broke through the barriers of time and space and arrived at a mysterious place in the world. They arrived above the Qilin cliff. At this moment, aside from Luo Fan, Wu Daozi, Master Ashenmu, and Do Guangxi, there were two other people on the Qilin cliff. One of them was the petite and cute girl Wu Weizi. At this moment, Wu Weizi was floating in the air, looking at Do Guangxi, who was engaged in an intense battle with Luo Fan. Beside Wu Weizi, there was a young man who was floating on a cloud. The young man was tall and wore a Taoist robe. He looked extremely elegant and natural. There was a faint aura around him, as if he was one with heaven and earth. Greetings, senior brother Fu Detsi. Seeing the young man's appearance, the God Zen Master and the Rain Shensi immediately showed themselves and bowed towards the young man as they greeted him. So it's junior brother Divine Zen Master and junior sister Rain Shensi. Are you two here to help junior brother Do Guangxi break through? The young man called Fu Detsi couldn't help but smile when he saw Divine Zen Master and Rain Shensi. That's right. The two of them didn't hide their intentions and smiled. Chapter 1041. Although Fu Detsi looked young, he was actually the one who had cultivated for the longest time and had the most profound cultivation. Among the people present, Wu Daozi was a disciple of the sage Myriad Beast's ancestor, while Tsang Muzi was a disciple of the sage Grand Dao ancestor. Rain Shensi was a disciple of the Nvaiwa Palace, while Shun Chan was a disciple of the Buddhist sect. Naturally, he was a disciple of the sage Amitabha. Wu Weizi was a disciple of the sage Grand Mist ancestor. In addition, Mad Do was a disciple of the sage Tongtian, while Fu Detsi was a disciple of the sage Primordial Lord of Heaven. In this way, the 8 people present included all the disciples of the 7 great sages in this world. This was extremely rare. This person is Luo Fan, a cultivator who came from the future through the era whirlpool. When he first arrived, he was only a greater perfection quasi-sage. I don't know how he managed to achieve such a breakthrough in just a few million years. He actually became a peak quasi-sage, and the power of his divine ability grew to such a level. Among the people present, apart from Wu Daozi, only Rain Shensi had seen Luo Fan before. Naturally, only Rain Shensi explained to Fu Detsi. Hearing Rain Shensi's words, Fu Detsi couldn't help but be slightly stunned, then he couldn't help but praise. The sage martial uncle's plan is indeed unfathomable. Originally, I always thought that such a plan was meaningless, but I didn't expect it to actually attract such a genius. To be able to break through the biggest bottleneck of cultivation in just a short period of less than 10 million years, it's really amazing. Master Fu Detsi exclaimed in admiration. The way he looked at Luo Fan had already become very happy. Junior martial brother Wu Daozi, you really are blessed. You are truly blessed. Fu Detsi praised and said to Wu Daozi, who had an unhappy expression on his face. Senior martial brother must be joking. This is only because Master's plan is perfect, but it's not my blessing," Wu Daozi said with a stiff expression. "Senior brother Wu Daozi, you jest. All of us have our own plans given to us by the saints, but only senior brother Wu Daozi has succeeded. Not to mention, he is such a powerful cultivator. If this is not senior brother's fortune, what is it?" Rain deity snickered. Rain Shensi chuckled. Wu Daozi's expression became even uglier. A cultivator from the future was only a great perfection quasi-sage. Although he wasn't an ordinary great perfection quasi-sage, he wasn't much of a threat to Mo Wuji. If Mo Wuji wanted to kill him, he just had to bear the displeasure of his master. But now, in just a few million years, this great perfection quasi-sage had already turned over a new leaf. He actually broke through the bottleneck and became a pinnacle quasi-saint. It would be fine if that was all. Even a pinnacle quasi-sage would only be slightly troublesome for him. Who would have thought that the moment this cultivator broke through, the power of his spell would be so strong? If it weren't for Master Tsangmu's protection, he might have completely broken free from Master Tsangmu's control and even become the master of the house. He was going to control himself. Facing such a cultivator, how could he feel that it was his fortune? His own luck? If the person in front of him was like the obedient Taoist priest who would bow down and worship him the moment he heard that he was a disciple of the sage, then he would believe everything he said. That would be his good fortune and his good fortune. "Senior brother Fu Detsi, I wonder if we should make a move now or wait?" Rain Detsi asked with a smile as he watched the intense battle between Luo Fan and Do Guangzi. "Let's wait. Now is not the right time. If we make a move now, junior brother Do Guangzi's chances of breaking through won't be the highest. I'm afraid we will waste this rare opportunity," Fu Detsi said sanctimoniously. Everyone understood what he meant. They all revealed an indescribable smile and looked at Do Guangzi with an incomparably dangerous gaze. Among them, the one with the most dangerous gaze was the petite Wu Weizi. He was gnashing his teeth so hard that it made a terrifying sound. Junior brother Do Guangzi can ignore it, but I'm afraid senior brother Tsangmu can't ignore it. I wonder if senior brother Fu Detsi can save senior brother Tsangmu. Rain Detsi's gaze turned to Tsangmu Zi, who was wrapped in a ray of light not far behind Luo Fan, and said, "Junior brother Tsangmu Zi can't ignore it." Fu Detsi smiled and said, "However, it's not good for me to make a move now. Luo Fan and junior brother Do Guangzi are fighting fiercely at this moment. If I save junior brother Tsangmu Zi, it will definitely affect Luo Fan. At that time, I'm afraid junior brother Do Guangzi's opportunity to break through will disappear. That won't be worth it. Senior brother Tsangmu Zi can't be saved." Wu Weizi was taken aback at this moment. He didn't wait for Fu Detsi to finish speaking before he spoke. "I mean, it is too important for senior brother Do Guangzi's cultivation right now. If he misses this opportunity, I don't know how many tens of millions of years he will have to wait for a similar opportunity. In any case, senior brother Tsangmu Zi is not in real danger right now. Why don't we let senior brother Tsangmu Zi stay there for a while, so as not to disturb senior brother Do Guangzi's opportunity?" As soon as Wu Weizi said those words, he knew they were inappropriate and hurriedly explained himself. Among everyone present, Wu Daozi and Tsangmu Zi had the best relationship. The reason why Tsangmu Zi was in such an awkward situation was because he wanted to help Wu Weizi. From the bottom of his heart, he naturally hoped to save Tsangmu Zi as soon as possible. He was indeed a bit unhappy when Wu Weizi rejected him. But after listening to Wu Weizi's words, he felt that Wu Weizi's words were quite reasonable. It was indeed quite inappropriate to save Tsangmu Zi at this time. "Tsangmu Zi, I'll have to trouble you for now. After this matter is over, I'll personally apologize to you." This thought flashed through Wu Daozi's mind, but he acted as if nothing had happened. He did not say anything, nor did he do anything. He just watched the battle between Dou Guangzi and Luo Fan with the others. At this time, Crazy Battle had completely forgotten everything in the outside world. At this time, his eyes were burning with the raging flames of war. The feeling that he could lose and die at any time was tightly wrapped around him. He could only pour all of his spirit and will into Luo Fan, who was in front of him, and strive to fight with Luo Fan. He did not dare to be distracted. This battle was unimaginably intense. Crazy Dou had almost exerted all the divine sense that he had cultivated in his life. The way he brandished his long staff seemed to display all the fighting mysteries of the universe. Every time it shook, the whole world would shake violently. Every arc of change contained the supreme mystery of the Great Way. Any change of his long staff was enough for any peak sage to comprehend it for a long time. It could even improve one's fighting ability beyond imagination. However, such a mysterious fighting method was still in a difficult position when facing Luo Fan. It was difficult for it to achieve any real effect. His situation became more and more difficult, and he was trying his best to step in the direction of failure. Every clash of power between him and Luo Fan left deep marks on his body. All of them left deep marks on his body, causing his power to be greatly impacted. He needed to expend more and more mental strength to continue controlling his power and continue to display that unimaginable combat strength. Under such circumstances, the feeling of failure became more and more obvious in Dou Guangzi's heart. This made him more and more excited. Failure was his life's pursuit. There was success and failure. That was a battle. There was only success and no failure. That was only success, but not a real battle. The way of battle that he cultivated. He needed to have a complete battle. In other words, he needed to have a complete failure. Only a complete failure would allow him to truly understand what a battle was. Only then would he have a deeper understanding of the way of battle and achieve a breakthrough in his cultivation. Because of this, Dou Guangzi didn't feel discouraged when he sensed the aura of failure. Instead, he became excited. The opportunity to break through that I've been chasing for so many years is here today. Ha ha! Dou Guangzi's thoughts were still lingering in his mind. His body moved like a bolt of lightning, constantly shifting in the void. Mysterious trajectories, mysterious movements, and intricate combat abilities were constantly appearing in the void. Time, space, matter, and energy, under the influence of his magical ability, were simply like plasticine, being casually kneaded by him, erupting with astonishing destructive power, and constantly being thrown towards Luo Fan, who was directly facing him. However, his methods didn't have much effect on Luo Fan. Luo Fan's attainments in martial arts were extremely amazing and had almost reached the peak. The bright red axe in his hand swung and chopped. All kinds of attacks that Dou Guangzi had displayed were directly turned into nothingness by him. It could only make the surrounding space, which had been completely shattered but had been completely suppressed by the power of the two of them. However, it still didn't break away from the suppression of the two of them and still maintained its seemingly unchanged state. Luo Fan cultivated the way of Tao fruit, which was based on the worldview of rules. Naturally, it wasn't a way of battle. However, the way of Tao fruit was all-encompassing. Although the benefits of this battle weren't as great for him as it was for Dou Guangzi, it was still quite beneficial. It allowed him to have a deeper understanding of his own cultivation and the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm. Faintly, he even felt that his cultivation realm had a tendency to continue to rise. When one's cultivation realm had just broken through the bottleneck, it was in a stage of rapid progress. At this time, Luo Fan happened to be at this stage. At such a stage, it was much easier to improve his cultivation realm than usual. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan's cultivation level had loosened just because of such an intense battle, and he felt like he was about to ascend. With the emergence of this feeling, his attacks naturally became more and more fierce. Three-dimensional talismans formed an axe shadow and shot out of the bright red axe in his hand. Then, these axe shadows blotted out the sky and rushed straight towards Mad Doe. Each of these axe shadows contained infinite power and contained the power to destroy heaven and earth. If they directly broke out, it was enough to completely turn the void within a radius of millions of miles into a chaotic scene similar to the state of chaos. In the face of such axe shadows, Do Guangxi's face turned serious. The long stick in his hand trembled slightly. In an instant, a kind of golden light rushed out from the long stick and directly rushed towards the endless axe shadows. This golden light was extremely powerful and faintly had the magical effect of the ruler spacetime. It also had the property of the magic treasure in Song Muzi's hand. When the axe shadows faced this golden light, they did not cause much of an impact. However, it didn't have much of an effect. It was completely annihilated by the golden light. Both of them turned into nothingness and didn't have much effect at all. At this moment, Fu Detsi, who was watching from the side, smiled and said, "Okay, now that junior brother Do Guangxi has reached a critical moment, it is time for us to help him." This sentence was a signal. After he said this, everyone present, including Wu Weizi, Rain Detsi, Wu Daozi, Shen Chan, and Fu Detsi, attacked at the same time. Wu Weizi raised his hand and took out a 4-foot-long sword. This longsword looked like an ordinary bronze longsword. It looked extremely ordinary. After she appeared, she immediately brought this longsword with her. She almost fused with the sword and rushed towards Do Guangxi. The long sword looked so ordinary, but its effect was extremely shocking. At that moment, it seemed like the spacetime within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was completely under the control of this long sword. The attack of the long sword seemed to be directly connected with karma, making it so that no matter where the target of the long sword hid, it could not truly dodge this long sword. At this moment, Wu Weizi's eyes were filled with killing intent. The corners of his mouth curled into a delighted smile. He looked as if he wanted to cut Mad Do down under his sword, causing Mad Do's body to perish and his soul to scatter. Following closely behind Wu Weizi, it was none other than Wu Daozi. Wu Daozi was holding the bronze ruler in his hand. This time, he did not activate the second layer of the bronze ruler's power. Instead, he held the ruler's body and pounced towards Mad Battle. His movements and the direction in which he pounced were perfectly coordinated with Wu Weizi. Their attacks did not interfere with each other at all. Instead, because of this perfect coordination, the power of their attacks was greatly increased, achieving the effect of 1 + 1 being greater than 2. Rain Shensi was not far behind the two of them. At this moment, she was holding a mirror in her hand. The mirror seemed to be made of bronze and looked like an ordinary dressing mirror. However, there were all sorts of unimaginable scenes displayed on it. She directly rushed towards Do Guangxi. As she rushed towards him, the scenes displayed on the mirror changed endlessly. The mirror also changed its trajectory according to the changes of the scenes. The speed at which the scenes in the mirror changed was beyond imagination. Even though everyone present was at the peak of the sage-to-be, they could not clearly see what the scenes were. However, as the mirror changed, both Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi realized that they could faintly sense that the way they attacked Do Guangxi had changed slightly. It became more perfect and the possibility of success increased. Next to Rain Shensi was God Zen Master. The God Zen Master held the prayer beads in his hand. The prayer beads looked very ordinary, as if they were carved from ordinary wood. He placed the prayer beads in the air, and the prayer beads looked like ordinary prayer beads as they flew towards Mad Fighter. He followed behind the prayer beads and seemed to be adjusting the prayer bead. Behind them was the strongest, Fu Zi. Holding the jade scepter in his hand, Fu Detsi moved forward step by step in the air. His movements were so leisurely that it was unimaginable. However, his speed was not any slower than Wu Daozi, Wu Weizi, Rain Shensi, and God Zen Master. As he moved forward, the jade scepter in his hand became more and more restrained. When it first appeared, it looked like a peerless jade sculpture. At first glance, one could tell that it was extremely precious. However, as he moved forward, the material of the jade scepter became more and more inferior. By the time he and the others arrived near Mad Doe, the moment Mad Doe sensed them, the material of the Rui jade had already turned into a jade-colored plastic. The inferior material and the sanctimonious and sage-like appearance of young Master Blessing were two polar opposites. When Fu Detzi and the others arrived, Luo Fan had already sensed them. However, at that time, the battle between him and Do Guangzi was in full swing, so he did not have the time to care about them. Just now, when they each took out a magic treasure that looked similar to the bronze ruler in Wu Daozi's hand and rushed towards him and Do Guangzi, he was so shocked that he almost gave up everything and ran away. Although he now had the confidence to face a pinnacle sage-to-be under a sage, he did not think that he could withstand the joint attack of 6 pinnacle sage-to-be under a sage with magic treasures that surpassed the pinnacle sage-to-be. If the reason why they rushed over was to help Do Guangzi and attack him, then of course he could only run as far as he could. Just as he was about to escape, he suddenly discovered a very strange thing. The target of their attack was not him, but the other person he was fighting, Do Guangzi. They seemed to be the disciples of a sage, so how could there be such a deep hatred between them? At this moment they actually want to hit Do Guangzi when he is at a disadvantage, but they still want to attack him. Look at that attack, they simply want to kill him. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. At the same time, he stopped his plan to escape and began to urge the strongest power of the bright red great axe in his hand, directly chopping towards Do Guangzi's head. This bright red great axe was a big axe that Luo Fan had used a brand new method to materialize the mysteries of the times, and its power was incredible. Chapter 1042. At this moment, Mad Doe had already sensed that the feeling of defeat had already covered the sky and the earth, completely obscuring all of his senses, making him feel as if he was completely immersed in the feeling of defeat. This feeling, for him, had long surpassed the level of defeat that he was looking forward to. The reason why he hoped for defeat was not because he was a masochist. Rather, it was because he wanted to perfect his Tao of battle, to let him know that there was another situation apart from victory. Under such circumstances, a moderate amount of failure was a great opportunity for him. It could allow him to understand the flaws in the Tao that he cultivated, and from there, he could achieve a great breakthrough in his Tao realm. However, the defeat that he was looking forward to did not include death. If he died and his Tao disappeared, even if he comprehended the flaws in his Tao, what could he do? Everything had already become nothing, so how could he hope for defeat? Because of this, death in defeat, although this was also a type of failure, had already surpassed his expectations, had already surpassed the limits of what he could bear. Therefore, at this very moment, when the feeling of defeat rose in his heart, Mad Doe instantly woke up from that extremely rare state. With a slight movement of his mind, he had already discovered what exactly was happening around him. The eyes of Fu Dazi, Wu Daozi, Rain Deity Zi, Wu Wei Zi, and Shen Chan Zi were almost fiendish. In an instant, he knew that if he did not have a suitable response today, this place would most likely be the place where he would die, the place where he would be buried. For a moment, he let out a loud roar. The long staff in his hand suddenly expanded from the size of a bowl to the size of a large pillar. With a slight tremble, incomparably bright golden light burst out from the long staff. This golden light was extremely mysterious. Each ray of golden light contained many mysteries of space-time and all living things. After these golden lights appeared, they turned into a light curtain, instantly wrapping around Mad Doe. Madman Doe was not an ignorant person. Among the people in front of him, among these people before him, any one of them had the strength to contend with him. When they combined together and displayed the magic treasures that they received from the sages, the power of the magic treasures was so strong that it simply surpassed the scope that any peak quasi-sage could withstand. If he did not defend, he would definitely be crushed into powder in an instant, turning invisible. This golden light was extremely profound, forming its own space-time, forming its own heaven and earth. The bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand was, after all, the fastest, and it directly chopped the golden light. In an instant the entire world shook violently. The 10 suns in the sky seemed to dim in an instant, as if all the light had been absorbed by some unfathomable existence. Then, Mad Doe, who was enveloped by the golden light, felt his face turn pale, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. This was the first mouthful of blood that Mad Fighter had spat out since he joined the battle. With a single glance, one would be able to tell just how great the impact he had suffered was. With a single glance, one would be able to understand just how hard it was for him to block Luo Fan's axe. However, even though he was in a sorry state, even though it was difficult for him to block it, he still managed to block it. The bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand contained such a terrifying power and contained such an incredible magical effect. However, in the face of that golden light, it could only cause a little bit of damage to Mad Doozy through that golden light, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. However, it couldn't split the golden light, and couldn't really hurt him. Mad Fighter roared, and the pillar-like staff in his hand trembled slightly. A boundless force shot out from the golden light, intending to break through Luo Fan's layers of defense and injure Luo Fan. However, Luo Fan's body was wrapped in a layer of three-dimensional talisman that seemed to be invisible and intangible. As soon as the counterattack force came into contact with the three-dimensional talisman, it suddenly shook, like a waterfall meeting a reef, stirring up an extremely huge momentum. However, it was unable to harm the reef, allowing the reef to stand tall in the huge waterfall, without the slightest tremble. At this time, Wu Weizi, who had made the first move, had already become one with his sword and directly collided with the golden light. The bronze sword in Wu Weizi's hand was also a magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level. Its power was no less than Wu Daozi's bronze ruler. At this moment, the bronze sword and Wu Weizi's full power collided together. Mad Fighter did not have the time to care about what happened to Luo Fan. He hurriedly shook the pillar-like staff in his hand, trying his best to control the surrounding golden light to block the bronze sword. Offense always had an advantage over defense. All of the power of the bronze sword was condensed into a single point, while the power of the long stick was condensed into a spherical shape in order to protect Madman Doe's entire body. Thus, the result of the collision was very obvious. The bronze sword directly broke through the defense of the golden light with Wu Weizi, and directly rushed towards Mad Fighter. If the staff in Mad Fighter's hand was still the size of a bowl, it would definitely be unable to defend against it. However, at this moment, the staff in Mad Fighter's hand had already become like a pillar. Therefore, he swung it in front of him, and the staff acted like a shield between him and the bronze sword. The way he swung his long stick was very mysterious, and contained the subtlety of countless battles he had experienced in his life. That mysterious and untraceable movement, aside from Luo Fan, who had profound attainments in martial arts, who could grasp it and clearly see its specific posture, no other cultivator could react at all. Although Wu Weizi was also at the pinnacle of the quasi-sages, and was also the disciple of a sage, her battle experience was far inferior to Mad Fighter's. Therefore, she was unable to react. The bronze sword directly pierced the staff. A loud crack resounded. The heaven and earth shook again. The 10 suns in the sky that had just recovered dimmed again. Mad Fighter felt his body shake violently, and he spat out a large mouthful of blood. This time, the blood he spat out was not the same as before. It was extremely fresh and contained vitality and power. It even turned into the blood of countless strange creatures in mid-air. Madman Doe's complexion turned pale again. Just as Wu Weizi was about to make a move, Wu Daozi's bronze ruler had already moved through the crack in the golden light and headed straight for Mad Fighter. Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi cooperated very well. In an instant, their figures flashed and they made way for Wu Daozi. The bronze ruler in Wu Daozi's hand pierced through the staff and headed straight for Mad Fighter's head. Mad Fighter's head was about to be completely destroyed by the bronze ruler. His body would die, his Tao would vanish, and his soul would scatter. If it was before, Mad Fighter, who had not improved at all, would not have been able to deal with such a situation. But at this moment it was different. Under the stimulation of the incomparably intense danger of defeat, his understanding of the way of battle had improved a lot. At this critical moment, he actually reacted. As he retreated, he swung the staff in his hand again. In an almost impossible situation, the staff moved in an unimaginably profound trajectory in the air. It directly blocked between the bronze ruler and his head. Wu Daozi's battle experience was richer than Wu Weizi's. However, compared to a battle maniac like Mad Fighter, he was still far from being able to deal with it. The bronze ruler in his hand could not change its position in time. It directly hit the pillar-like staff. There was a loud crack. Heaven and earth shook and the 10 suns dimmed. This time, the surrounding space-time could not be suppressed. A gray, primal-like state of chaos was produced from the collision. It was like a gray cloud that surrounded Wu Daozi and Mad Battle. Wu Daozi was protected by the power of the bronze ruler. Between the dusky clouds, it was as if he was in a normal space. There were no changes at all. The golden light around Dou Quangzi's body could even resist the giant axe in Luo Fan's hand, so these dusky chaotic scenes were naturally not a problem. Needless to say, Luo Fan and Wu Weizi, Luo Fan was protected by an invisible three-dimensional talisman made of gray mist. Naturally, he would be fine. The bronze sword in Wu Weizi's hand was a magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the quasi-sage level. It would not be a problem for it to protect her. Hence, none of the people present were affected by the appearance of the grayish clouds around them. Mad Fighter barely managed to block the attack from Wu Daozi's bronze ruler. He was in an even worse state than before. He spat out mouthfuls of blood. The blood was more vivid than when he blocked Wu Weizi's attack. The blood-colored creatures were stronger and more mysterious. However, they were still surrounded by the grayish chaos. If they were in another location, these blood-colored creatures would still have a chance to live. However, in this place, even Luo Fan and the others had to rely on various methods to protect themselves. How could these blood-colored creatures that had just been born escape? However, it was warped by the gray chaos around it, and it disappeared without a trace. It seems that these people have been greatly offended by Mad Fighter in the past. Otherwise, he would not be so ruthless to deal with him. Luo Fan looked at Rain Shensi, Divine Zen Master, and Fu Detzi who were rushing in from the outside and thought to himself. Rain Shensi and the others were not much slower than Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi. When Wu Daozi's bronze ruler collided with the long rod, Rain Shensi had already used the bronze mirror to rush into the golden light. The bronze mirror flashed with countless lights and shadows. It passed through Wu Weizi, Wu Daozi, and the long rod that was blocking Wu Daozi and rushed towards Mad Fighter's head. In the face of such a bronze mirror, Madman Dou didn't have enough time to use his staff to block it. He roared and his eyes flashed with madness. Half of his body instantly collapsed into a bloody mist and condensed into a huge hand in front of him. This huge hand was extremely fast and the position it condensed in was also very mysterious. The moment it formed was the moment the bronze mirror hit the palm of the hand. At this moment, the huge hand formed by the bloody mist suddenly clenched and held the bronze mirror in its palm. The direction in which the bronze mirror moved was extremely mysterious and profound. It adjusted itself countless times in the void at every moment, and every adjustment was based on the situation it encountered. Normally speaking, if Madman Dou used his staff to block the bronze mirror, no matter how exquisite it was, he wouldn't even need Rain Deity to adjust it. The bronze mirror would automatically change shape and bypass the defense, directly making Madman Dou's interception a bubble. But at this moment, Mad Fighter did not use such a method. He directly collapsed half of his body and used the power of that half of his body. The ultimacy directly condensed into a giant hand and held the bronze mirror in its palm. This transformation process didn't require time or space. It was as if it had existed since ancient times, and the bronze mirror was already in its hand. The bronze mirror had no time to react, let alone dodge the bloody mist hand. Therefore, it was directly held in the palm of the bloody mist hand. However, the bronze mirror was a magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the sage to be level. Even though his most exquisite transformation had been dodged by Mad Fighter at the cost of a great sacrifice. But the power of the bronze mirror itself, it was still extremely incredible. In the moment of the collision, the bronze mirror's power burst forth. With a loud crack, the world shook. The bloody mist hand directly collapsed into countless bloody mists, unable to maintain the appearance of a huge hand. However, it was completely destroyed by the bronze mirror. Mad Fighter did not spit blood at this moment. Instead, 7 streams of blood gushed out of his 7 orifices. It looked like his entire body had turned into a fountain. That tragic appearance was enough to send a chill down the spine of anyone who saw it. The bronze mirror that Rain Deity used also lost the power to move forward at this moment and directly stopped in place. Mad Fighter was in such a tragic state. Rain Deity, who had clashed head-on with him without holding back, was not unscathed either. Her body stopped in midair, and her face turned pale for a while before she recovered. Among the 3 of them, Rain Deity was the one who looked the most miserable. Although Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi's attacks were blocked, they did not suffer much damage. Their expressions and actions were no different from before, as if nothing had happened. The reason for this was none other than the fact that Madman Do was merely trying his best to block their attacks. As for Rain Shenxi's attacks, he was counterattacking. Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi only needed to withstand the power that they had unleashed. Because they were prepared, they naturally did not suffer much damage. Rain Deity, on the other hand, had to withstand the even more terrifying power that Mad Fighter had unleashed. It was impossible for him not to be in a miserable state. Divine Zen Master and Fu Deity were equally fast. Before Rain Deity and the others could gather their attacks again, they had already passed them and attacked Mad Fighter at the same time. In God Zen Master's hand was a string of thought beads. It looked very ordinary, but no matter what kind of power it was, it could not stop it. Whether it was the gray cloud that was produced from the battle or the golden light that Do Guangzi had released, none of them could stop the thought beads at all. The thought beads and God Zen Master easily passed through without any obstruction. As for the jade rui in Fu Deity's hand that looked like it was made of plastic, it seemed to be commanding everything. It was not that the countless obstructing powers could not be discovered. Instead, they directly yielded to the jade rui and naturally moved aside before it passed through, revealing a path for Fu Deity to pass through. This allowed the jade rui and Divine Zen Master to directly arrive in front of Mad Fighter. Junior brother Mad Fighter, there is no need to thank me. We are fellow disciples. It is only natural for me to help you break through. Fu Deity actually had the time to speak at this critical moment. His words were spoken in such a short amount of time, yet everyone present could hear them clearly. Not a single word was mixed up in his words. When Mad Fighter heard this voice, his eyes flashed with endless anger. After killing me to this state, he actually said that he was helping me and that I don't need to thank him? Is there such a shameless person in this world? Fu Deity did not give Mad Fighter a chance to curse back. The jade rui in his hand and the prayer beads in Divine Zen Master's hand hit Mad Fighter at the same time. Mad Fighter had already exhausted all his energy to block the attacks of Luo Fan, Wu Weizi, Wu Daozi, and Rain Deity. At this time, facing the most ferocious Fu Deity and Divine Zen Master, he only had time to explode his body and turn it into a blood mist in an attempt to resist. His whole body was completely destroyed by the jade rui and prayer bead. The moment he was destroyed, Mad Fighter's mind seemed to have transcended to an unimaginable realm. In an instant, his will was drowned by countless thoughts. His time seemed to have completely stopped at this moment. This originally insignificant time of not knowing how many billionths of a millisecond had become incomparably long to him, so long that he could not see the end. This failure? In such a wonderful state, Mad Fighter's spirit was unprecedentedly clear, and he had a very deep understanding of the state he was in. I'm going to die. It turns out that this is failure. As he thought so, his face involuntarily pulled into an incomparably ugly smile. As he came to this realization, the memories he thought he had forgotten began to surface from the depths of his memory. These memories started from hundreds of millions of years ago when he was just born. They continued to develop and evolve, and eventually he was accepted as a disciple by sect leader Tong Tian, who taught him the way of fighting, and then developed until the moment of his final defeat. All the memories during this period, no matter how small and subtle they were, reappeared without any omission, making him feel as if he had re-experienced the entire course of his life. It would take at least tens of thousands of years for him to re-experience the memories of hundreds of millions of years from beginning to end in his mind. But at this time, when he completely experienced these memories, he was still in the moment of life and death, as if those tens of thousands of years did not exist at all for him.